Right, good afternoon, evening. We will call this regular meeting of the City Plan Commission to order. Today's Tuesday, March 18th. It is 4:47 PM. Let's start with a roll call, starting with Noel.
Noel Santos. Dave Caldwell.
Sid McKenna.
Charlotte Lipschitz.
Miguel Quesada.
Cheyenne Manjikar, DPD staff.
Bob Azar, staff.
Megan DeSanto, legal counsel.
And I'm Michael Gazdaco, Chair. We'll go right into the approval of the minutes for the February 18th, 2025 meeting. We hope you all, they were sent out, circulated. Hope you had a chance to review them. If there are any edits, now would be the time, or a motion to approve as drafted.
Move to accept the minutes.
Second.
All right, we'll go, I'll do a voice vote. Just, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the minutes are approved. Director's report, Mr. Azar. We want to talk about April.
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, the first round of zoning changes that you saw, I guess now maybe December, has gotten first passage by the city council. Second passage is due this Thursday night. And we expect that to happen, and the mayor will sign it within a few days after that. So that's a big milestone for us. We got a lot advanced in that first phase. The second phase, we did have an agenda item number 2. Sadly, I don't have too much to say to you about it tonight. By the time we get to, I'm sorry, that was item number 3. But we have formulated position papers on several of the items that are in that second phase, including gas stations, zoning, student housing, parking, and the design regulations. We're going to be talking with the mayor and others about that in the coming days. So we should have some more information for you next month on that. So the good news is that we'll have a shorter meeting because I won't have anything to say about item number 3. Bad news is I don't have
Much to say about
item number 3.
Understood. And then,
and
we
then
also want to
yes.
talk about the April meeting. It seems that there are some scheduling conflicts. The scheduled meeting is slated for the 15th of April, which is spring break for most schools in the area, so I will not be here. We had floated the possibility of a 22nd meeting the following Tuesday. We wanted to kind of take a pulse and see who was going to be here on the 15th, if we can get a quorum. If we can't, what about the 22nd?
Yeah, I think we had heard that we had 4 could make it on the 15th, at least 4 and 3 on the 22nd. So maybe folks can tell us how many of you would be available on the 15th.
We have 3, 4. Noel, you're good?
Yeah.
Well, then let's keep it for the 15th.
Yeah.
You can chair the meeting, and we'll just keep it as scheduled. All right, wonderful. All right, enough housekeeping. Let's move right into agenda item number 1, which is a major change to a land development project that we've heard previously. It's case number 25-006 MA at 220 Blackstone Street.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll provide a quick introduction as the applicants make their way up. So this is a request for a major change to land development project that most of you may have seen last year. It consisted of a multifamily building along with a second building of 2 stories that was intended for an educational use. The applicant is back and they're seeking a major change because they're now proposing to increase the height of that building to 6 stories. And as it results in a change of over 20%, they are in front of you for a major change. So the applicants here, they're gonna tell you about the change as well as how it affects other aspects of site development like landscaping, parking, and traffic. And they'll also be talking about the building's design. So the applicants here and they can take it away.
Wonderful. Oh, it's great to be before the board. Thank you for having us again this evening. Bob, going on, as always. A little bit about our development. We were in previously to speak about the plan.
I'm sorry, Harry, did you want to just introduce yourself?
Oh, happy to do so. Harry Angell, CEO of Marathon Construction and Development.
Franklin Angell, CFO of Marathon Construction and Development.
Sam Hemingway with Garofalo and Associates, Civil.
Virginia Branch Architects.
Do I have a career in being a game show host? Little practice. Anyway, so just a quick update on the Flynn, the 6-story commercial building and residential. We're moving forward on the 5th floor currently. Still targeting to having the building capping off sometime in probably May this year. And still targeting to have, tenants moving into the building sometime second quarter of 2026. So we're moving along with great guns and really excited about it. And thanks for all the support in the community. We really appreciate it. Since the last time we were before you, we had a couple of tenants that we had looked at, one being Youth Build and so forth, and a couple of others. And Achievement First approached us about 6 months ago, and as luck would have it, they're looking for a new location in the city of Providence. And it seemed like the stars had aligned to a very large extent, and they were looking to cite a K-8 program right in this neighborhood. So we started to put pen to paper, see that we weren't overburdening the site, enlisted the help with Sam and Virginia to sort of come up with a concept here that they can talk about in a couple of minutes. But what's really exciting about it is they're gonna move in, under the premise of having a K-5 and see how that works. And then move in, that balance of, 6th, 7th, and 8th, once they've been up and operating for a couple of years. So it really settles into the community nicely. As I'm sure you folks have concerns as well as we did initially about the traffic in the neighborhood. So we enlisted VHB, who is currently in the midst of an institutional traffic study for the hospital district, of which we're involved in as well. And although there was a community, an elementary school in the community previously, there's some tweaking that needs to happen in the neighborhood. And we took advantage of that relationship with VHB and brought in the city traffic engineer, Nate Orso, and sort of worked through some details like replacing no parking signs that had come down after, several years, and making Blackstone one way all the way down to Eddy Street, and really trying to create a grid system in that neighborhood. And to take it one step further, we're also exploring how to mitigate some of the parking issues that exist in that neighborhood as well. So that's, I think at that point, I'll turn this over to Sam. He could give you a little bit of an update with respect to.
I have a zip drive if there's a mechanism or not. I sort of, the expectation was drawing that you could pull up the site plan, but
Yeah. Do you
I have hard copies of
That
both.
you could, you have a lot.
I can,
I did not bring the laptop.
I'll pull it up.
I apologize for the confusion.
Are you handing those out?
I'm happy to do. Do you want me to do both?
These are the elevations.
Oh, yeah, that's.
And the renderings.
Works.
Oh, you do have the site plans anyway, we brought elevations of the building and a couple of perspectives, that information, I think we have, the city has electronically.
I'm sorry, Mr.
I'm sorry, I believe.
You gotta speak into the microphone.
I'm talking to the microphone. We have friends at home with us or not remotely here joining us, so you have to make sure we speak on the microphone at all times.
So, we supplemented, I see you, have access to the site drawings. We have also elevations of the buildings, which were just handed out, those copies, and some perspectives, showing the entire site development. As Harry mentioned, we are here to modify a previous site plan approval. There's not very little, but there's little change to the previous configuration on the property. The primary change has been an enlargement of the school building that was always proposed on the site. So the footprint is identical, but the height of the building has gone up from 2 stories to 5 stories with a full basement. I'll let the architect speak a little bit more about that, but in terms of siting, there were some subtleties that are required through this process associated with that change. Specifically, the relief that this board is allowed to grant in terms of percentages of required parking and dimensional relief. For that reason, we had to modify the building location slightly and enlarge the parking. Now that this meets the specific needs of these tenants, but also incorporates that the 50% threshold, again, that is approvable by this board. The parking fields have been maintained from the original approval, so that the residential unit, which is the large L-shaped building on the left, my memory serves me, I think is 178 units. The parking field and circulation pattern associated with that building, which is well under construction, is unchanged. The parking field to the right with a vegetated buffer between the 2 parking fields has been maintained, but an additional bay of parking has been added to support the additional staff and student counts associated with the building. And the building has been shifted to the north towards Blackstone. So again, it is a substantive change. Obviously, it's a major change as was presented initially. But the massing and the individual units are unchanged. It is a slightly more intense development. Because of the maintenance of the same general characterization, the topics that we normally speak about in terms of stormwater management, utility extensions and the like are effectively all of those infrastructure improvements, many of which have been constructed already, are sufficient to support this development without modification at all. So there's some permitting and I's being dotted and T's being crossed, but effectively the infrastructure that was constructed with the project will be maintained. There's some slight modifications to the landscaping to meet the coverage, the canopy requirements. In addition, there's been some the impacts to existing specimen trees on the properties it has changed slightly. We've been coordinating both with the city department and the city forest, planning department and the city forester. We believe we have a resolution to that, but there is some, technically there are some final, again, I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed. Generally speaking, the existing trees, there's very little tree coverage on the site. There were 3 large trees on the site. There was a commitment to save one of those. The tree that was originally intended on being saved, that is still the intent, but the proximity of the building is going to make that much more difficult. And for that reason, the second tree has also been indicated for saving. The third tree was removed already as part of the approved construction on the site. So I'm here, certainly here to answer questions. We have a lot of very specific information, most of which I think you've heard before. But the larger topic, I think, is the view of the building and the operational specifics of the development program in that general area, on the site and in the general area.
Thank you, Sam. Virginia, would you like to take us through building this?
Sure. You could see in the site plan that this building fronts Blackstone, and the residential building that's under construction, it nestles into the parking lot in that way. And I think one of the really nice things about this site plan is that the school is really maintaining the corner there, where before there really hasn't been a placement there in the corner. And so the scale of the school building to the apartment building is similar. And I think the materials that we've chosen are complementary. So they're they're meant to feel like a collaboration of two buildings, but the school is definitely a different use, and we're looking at some different window vocabularies and materials. One of the materials that we're planning on at the base is a brick veneer. The building is right on the street. We want to have something that's durable, but also warm. It's a school. We want to be welcoming. So we're looking at some samples of different types of yellow brick. And then above, we're looking at materials that would also be warmer in nature, sort of, it's a siding that would be a warmer texture. It's not really showing here. This is looking more gray, but we're looking at more natural earth tone colors. It just something with the color on the screen is a little deceiving. We did provide some renderings. I don't know if there's a rendering in the presentation here. So hopefully you're able to sort of see the two buildings in context with each other and the rendering that we provided printout. There are two entrances to the building. There's an entrance that, and we envision this being the primary entrance for students on the front, but there's also an entrance off of the parking lot. So the building in plan communicates from the front to the back through a central corridor.
Are there any questions at this point that we could answer for the board or?
You said that VHB was undertaking a traffic study for the area and the impacts of this site.
Yes, they've actually done it in two stages. They've already provided recommendations through our meeting with the city traffic engineer already. Basically amounting to, replacing the worn and sort of faded and damaged no parking signs along Blackstone, as well as the potential for making Blackstone one way from the point where it stops being one way, which is, I believe, it's just beyond Gay Street, all the way down to Eddy Street. So to create sort of a gridded traffic pattern, which is much better than what it is currently. And then the hospital is receiving their traffic study plan along with its 4-year institutional plan, I would guess within the next month or so. And we're working hand in hand with them because we're going to be in this neighborhood for a very long time to come, and whatever Marathon development and construction can do to help facilitate and, mitigate this traffic problem that exists primarily because of the hospital, we're happy to do.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Question. A question about the entrance. It seems like it's shown as stairs coming perpendicularly off the street in the plan, but it looks like in the rendering that might have been updated.
Yes, I think with additional, sorry, yep, here comes the mic. With additional study as part of the rendering, I think what you're seeing there, we're taking advantage of the fact that the building is set back to create a 1 in 20 accessible route to the building by taking advantage of the hill. So we'd be coming from higher grade and we're almost level coming into the first floor. Yeah, there we go. And then to catch back up with grade, we'd have a stair down. So we did rotate that entrance ramp. Thanks for picking that up. I think this allows for easier flow and a simple, accessible entrance.
Thank you, Virginia.
No other question? Right, with that,
A quick question on, so
the parking is one for every three, and which you're providing. I was just wondering about the bicycle spaces, where you provided half, if I'm reading this correctly. And
Yes.
wonder why you weren't able to find maybe some more space for, go ahead.
Frankly, I think we probably could, the expectation is the bicycle requirement for a school is extremely high in the city. I think the staff recognizes that. There was certainly every intent to provide suitable, parking facilities and for accessibility for pedestrians and other type of access to the property. There are, on the plan, the location is along the entire back frontage, so the protected side of the building between the parking field and the school. So there certainly is ample opportunity to add more bikes if there was a shortage.
Yeah.
But, we didn't frankly think it was necessary.
Bob, maybe you can speak to this. We've run into this we've seen quite a few, school applications over the past 6 to 12 months. And they all run into the same issue.
Yeah.
It's quite.
Yeah,
massive,
we
the amount.
require too much bike parking, to plain and simple. Some schools manage to figure out how to do it, others have asked for variances. You'll see in this next package of zoning changes, refinements to that as we look to refine parking requirements overall. I do want to mention one thing about parking for this site. So they did get a parking adjustment of 50%. What they're proposing is increasing due to the increased size of the school and the increased number of classrooms and so forth. They still fall within that 50% adjustment that you already granted, although the number has risen. We can arguably approve that increase in parking as a minor change. It doesn't trigger the 20% increase. But I think maybe out of an abundance of caution, if you just sort of reaffirm we would ask that you reaffirm the 50% reduction in parking as you had the last time, finding that the development is eligible for it due to the 100% affordable housing that's being provided on the site.
Thank you, Bob. Anything else before we hear the staff report? All right, Joanne, take it away.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. And as you can see, the applicant spoke about the building and sites design. And it should be noted that the resultant height with the addition is estimated to be about 64 feet and 6 stories, which is within the 75-foot limit of the MMU 75 zone where they are located. And the applicant spoke about the building's design, which conforms to the type of design that the ordinance encourages. As far as landscaping goes, they will meet the canopy coverage requirement, and they have indicated that they will be preserving the significant trees around the site. As far as environmental management goes, from the last time they were here, they are working with the city engineer as well as to approve the plan, the drainage plan on site. As far as parking goes, they did speak about the adjustment that they received. We have detailed how their parking requirement has changed, but they will be within that requirement based on the 50% adjustment that you had granted. They will also conform to the lighting plan as they spoke about. And so from there moving on, we do find this to be consistent with the intent of the comprehensive plan. This is in the business mixed-use development designation of the future land use map of the plan. The uses that they're proposing are permitted by right. They will meet the dimensional, parking, as well as landscaping requirements. We don't foresee a negative environmental impact. This is a buildable lot with no plan constraints or development, and vehicular and pedestrian access will be provided from Blackstone and Gay Streets. So based on that, we recommend that you approve the major change with these conditions. One, as discussed, we ask that you reaffirm the dimensional adjustment. Then two, that the drainage plan shall be subject to the city engineer's approval and that processing of the final plan be delegated to DPD staff.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, this is a public hearing, so if we have anyone left, do we have anyone on the sign up sheet for this agenda item? Okay, thank you. If you're joining us virtually, please raise your virtual hand or press *9 if you'd like to speak on this matter. This is agenda item number 1, case number 25-006 MA.
Okay, we do have one hand up here. This is Tina Lado from Ronald McDonald House.
Yes, hello. Hi, can you hear me?
There you go.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks for hosting this meeting. I'm glad to be able to hear what's going on. The Ronald McDonald House is located at the corner of Gay and Blackstone Streets, and we've been here for 35 years. And I spoke at the last time this project was discussed. We had the opportunity to meet with Harry Angell from Marathon, so thanks for coming to chat with us, Harry. We are still concerned with the additional traffic in the area and making sure that we have a safe and secure, peaceful environment for the families that we serve. I'm really interested in learning more about the traffic study just because the area is so very congested now. So I'm curious what the outcomes of that will be. And then parking is a serious concern for us. There's just inadequate parking as it is. And having a 50% deficit on this project is definitely going to impact the surrounding area. So those are our primary concerns.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else in the virtual audience who wishes to speak on this agenda item? Last call for anyone in the actual physical audience. Seeing none, we will close the public comment portion of this agenda item at this time. Well, I mean, I can't speak to what the outcomes of the traffic study that the applicant and the hospital are undertaking right now, but I can say that there's a significant amount of surface parking in this area that we're hoping to redevelop in some way, shape, or form over the next 20 years, or have developed. And parking and traffic flow are going to be an issue. I agree that it's a bigger conversation though than just with this specific parcel. I think that whole area needs to be discussed and not just on a parcel by parcel basis. And I think I'm assuming that's what the hospital is undertaking before they come back to us for their institutional master plan.
Yeah, that's right. And with respect to this project, I think what they've proposed to have a certain circulation pattern for pickup and drop off for parents, and then separately for the buses. It makes sense, and I think it will facilitate at least avoiding conflicts with those two streams of traffic. Keep in mind, this used to be a public school on this site. And as Harry said, they're coming into an area that has long-standing traffic and parking issues. There are thousands of parking spaces surrounding the hospital campus. And we just engaged in a 4-day charrette last week to look at this entire area and look at opportunities for redevelopment. And a big part of it is dealing with the land that is currently acres and acres of surface parking, the fact that streets have been abandoned, forming super blocks that in themselves create traffic problems. So, you should know that this is top of mind for the city, the redevelopment of this entire area, that the Urban League site, redevelopment agency asset is, there's an ongoing planning process around what should be happening there. So, there's a lot of moving parts here. And I think, that, you know, what we're looking for down the line is more mixed use, more intense development. There are opportunities to build at scale in this area that you don't have anywhere else in the city. And I think, this project, you know, really is kind of leading the way in terms of thoughtful mixed use redevelopment.
I would agree, and I don't think we can hold this applicant responsible for fixing all of the traffic woes in this entire area. That would be grossly unfair. Commissioners, any other discussion?
Well, while we're on the subject, which is why I was even asking about the bicycle parking, because I didn't know if more people were planning to use that. In terms of schools, I'm not as familiar, so it shows that 1 out of 3 employees would have parking. Is that typical of a school where 1 out of 3 people are driving to work? Or if not, where would those additional people look to park? Are they planning on off-site parking, or, yeah, if you could please shed some light on that first.
Sure, happy to answer that. Based upon our conversations with Achievement First, that's the ratio that they come up with.
Okay.
Based upon the likelihood of, you know, public transportation in the area, it's a transit overlay district, all those sorts of things. So that was all taken into account.
Okay, just I didn't know if teachers took public transit or biking or whatever. Now the other thing, I know there was a school there before, but some charter schools have a different hour. You know, they may stay in the school longer. So 2:30, 3 o'clock, which is typical, doesn't really conflict with the rush hour of the hospitals. In this case, what is the time that they usually let out, and is it gonna butt against, you know, potential rush hour traffic?
They're talking about school drop off happening between 7:20 in the morning and 7:45.
Yeah.
And classes run anywhere from 8 to 3:30, 4:30, depending on the type of school day.
Thank you.
So I think with that being staggered in that fashion, we've taken that into account, and they do have some flexibility. Because they don't want to discharge at the time that, you know, the hospital shift is changing from 7 to 3 or things of that nature either, to further complicate the traffic problem.
Thank you.
Any other discussion points, commissioners?
I think I missed some of the nuances around the pickup and drop off pattern. So is it buses are gonna line up on Blackstone and vehicles are gonna pick up and drop off from the parking lot behind?
Correct. The traffic configuration that we worked out was that parents would come, you know, in off Eddy, come up Willard, cut through the parking lot that we own on Staniford, and then come into Gay and then head straight out to Gay, up Prairie, up Pearl, I need to say, and up the Prairie and out. Or they could come out and take a right-hand turn on the one-way going back to the highway on Blackstone. The one thing that we had spoken with Nate about is making certain that there was no parking along that upper section of Blackstone so that traffic could still pass as buses were staged, you know, at pickup time as well. So there's been significant thought into it. And I think it's also important to add that Achievement First is, you know, really contemplating a long-term lease, you know, north of 30 years. So they want to be in the neighborhood. They want to be good neighborhood, you know, partners and so forth, and help resolve problems rather than create problems. I think it's good to have that context, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
Just in terms of the no parking signs, or the assumption that people aren't gonna park just because it says no parking. Living across from a middle school myself, like, nobody pays attention to that, so. Even if it means that cars are gonna have to squeeze, I mean, they will squeeze, they'll scratch your car, they'll take a mirror off, it's just bear that in mind, because people don't really pay attention to signs.
That is true. We hope that people stay honest, but it doesn't always happen when it comes to, people are in a hurry and want to get in and out of places.
Well, they
We've seen
think
it.
I'm just gonna be 5 minutes and just running in to pick up my kid, and
Right.
it's never that, so.
Dave, Noel, anything else on this one? So on this, I mean, overall, I'm still excited about this project, and I think the added capacity for a school, which was always envisioned here as an educational facility. Now we know who the end user is going to be, and there, or potentially going to be. Makes it a little clearer, which helps. I reiterate that it's gonna be an issue long term, and I think that's something that we're gonna have to contemplate significant changes in these traffic patterns when the hospitals come back up for their institutional master plan, because that is the main driver of all of the traffic in this area. And I think there's a lot of development opportunity in this area as well. There are many underutilized parcels that need to be reimagined in some way, shape, or form. But there also needs to be some forward thinking in how we deal with the traffic and the parking that is currently situated in those surface lots. So the first thing that we should do is hang on one second. Yeah. So before we take action on the major change of the preliminary plan approval, just for good housekeeping, we should reaffirm the 50% reduction in parking due to that it's eligible based on the affordable housing. And it's an amenity provided reasonably related to the adjustment. It's for vehicular parking and for bike parking, which we've already awarded, granted this applicant, and they're going to maintain that. But with this major change, we will want to reiterate that we affirmatively vote to grant the 50% dimensional adjustment for vehicular and bike parking, based on the 100% affordable housing component, and the amenity provided is reasonably related to the adjustment that we're granting. So if anyone wanted to make that motion, they could do so. We'll move. All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. We'll go around and do a vote. Noel? Aye. Dave? Aye. Sid?
Aye.
Charlotte?
Aye.
Miguel?
Aye.
And I vote aye. We have almost a full contingent. That takes a little longer when we have more people. It's a good problem to have. So then we would go through to the major change of the preliminary plan based on the findings, testimony that we've received, and the plan submitted by the applicant. And that we would vote to approve the major change to the preliminary plan, subject to the drainage being subject to the city engineer's approval and the processing of the final plan delegated to DPD staff. So moved. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. All right, we'll go around and do one more vote. Noel? Aye. Dave? Aye. Sid?
Aye.
Charlotte?
Aye.
Miguel?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Best of luck.
Thank you very much for your continued support.
All right, our next agenda item is agenda item number 2. Is a major land development project, case number 25-002 MI, 217 Angell Street. The applicant is Signature Properties LLC.
Sure, thanks, Commissioners. Thanks. Thanks, Commissioners, and I'd just like to provide a quick introduction while the applicant is setting up. So this is a request to construct a multifamily development consisting of 32 residential units with internal structured parking. And the applicant will be telling you about the project and how they've designed and oriented it in relation to the site. Now, in requesting this, in requesting preliminary plan approval, they are also seeking certain dimensional adjustments. They are asking for a dimensional adjustment for height, where the maximum height in this zone is 45 feet, but they're requesting a height of proposing a height of approximately 57 feet. They're requesting adjustments from the corner side setback on Angell Street and Phones Alley, an adjustment from the rear setback requirement, as well as the building coverage requirement. They have received an administrative modification from the total maximum impervious coverage requirement, where 65% is required, but approximately 74% is proposed. So also it should be noted that this lot fronts on 3 streets, Angell Street, Phones Alley, and Brook Street. So the applicant's here and they can tell you more about the building's design as well as issues like parking, landscaping, and other items that you typically discuss at this stage.
Hi, Kelly.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. For the nice to see you all. Haven't been here in a while. For the record, my name is Kelly Morris Salvatore. I represent the applicant, and I just want to introduce the team. We have Christine West from Kite Architects, Joe Casali and Bill Lavery from Casali Engineering, Ed Pimentel, who is our land use consultant. We also have Diane Sewell, who's joining us virtually due to an injury, so we didn't make her attend in person. And we have Keith Bernstein, who is the principal of the applicant. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction. As you know, this is 17 Brook Street, which is also known as Assessor's Plat 13, Lot 320. We are here on a minor land development project. We're before you with Unified Development Review because we require certain adjustments that requires a public hearing. The zoning here is RP with an I3E overlay district. The proposal is for 32 3-bedroom dwelling units. I want to make it clear about a procedure that we recently went through. We requested and received an administrative modification on February 28th for impervious surface coverage of 15%. We started the process of asking for a variance just because of timing. So we published it in the newspaper, but we never had to send out notice to abutters because the modification was granted. No variance is requested for that item. We are also providing structured parking, which requires certain adjustments in accordance with section 1904, which Christine is going to review and Ed Pimentel will also talk about. We appreciate that we have a favorable staff report and that recognizes that this is a unique property that requires these adjustments. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, yeah, please, one moment.
just to be clear, this was noticed as Unified Development Review, but since you do not require a zoning variance, the CPC doesn't need to conduct Unified Development Review.
I misspoke. So, but we are here because we require adjustment.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Christine West. It's very nice to see all of you again. It's very different being on this side of it. So I respect your time and really appreciate your service to this board. I know how challenging it can be sometimes, but hopefully we will make your job easy today. Refresh you on the site, one of the addresses, this is fronting on 3 public rights of way. So our address is also 209-217 Angell Street. It is at the corner, southeast corner of Angell and Brook Streets. You may recall that this was the subject of a lot of attention. There were 3 multifamily structures on this property that were demolished last year. This is a different owner. This ownership group took possession in November of 24. So we understand there's a lot of negative feelings around that. I can't say I don't share them. We're here with a clean slate on a new proposal. This lot is currently vacant, as we'll show in a minute, and we're excited to show you what we have planned. So it's important to notice here we're at the intersection between many zones coming together.
The pink that you see to the left of Brook Street, which is west up this page north, is a commercial C2 zone. Immediately to the south is another commercial zone, which is the existing Citizens Bank building, and it's owned by Brown University. The green areas are the kind of remainder of the RP zone. Immediately to the north is the campus of the Wheeler School. And as you may know, there's been quite a bit of development on Brook Street, including a 5-story building across the way immediately, well, and to the south. But we're in a very unique position here because we're on this border. A few years ago, there was a proposal to build a hotel on this site. And Miguel, I think you were there. This commission approved that, but it did fail at the city council because it required a zone change to C2. So before we even started, we heard loud and clear from the neighborhood that the Brook Street was a line that shall not be crossed in terms of further expansion of the C2. So our first design challenge is how do we make this work within the RP zone? So we did a fair amount of studying and we came up with a proposal that works, but we do need to ask you for some dimensional adjustments within that RP. Okay, so this is the site as it stands today. You can see on the left, there's the Citizens Bank building. The darker building is called the Carlisle. That's an apartment building. Minden Hall, again, is a Brown University building. On the right, we can see the Vedanta Society, which our firm designed originally over a decade ago in recent renovations. This is generally a project we're going to go through a little bit more detail, but to give you an overview, yeah, this is 32 fairly large 3-bedroom condominiums. And the fact that they're going to be condominiums for sale makes it a very different project than a rental property. It means the design is different. It means the amenities that we provide are different. It's a really unique opportunity to provide some diversity in terms of the income level, the type of resident here. These are really aimed at empty nesters, people who may want to move back to the city to avoid having to take care of a large house. Maybe the children are grown and their social life doesn't around the kids anymore. Amenities like a walkable neighborhood are very appealing. So we're really trying to do everything we can to bring people into the city, frankly, at an older price point, although we're not restricting it. Families are welcome, but this is going to appeal, we think, to the empty nester crowd. So we'll get into the parking a little bit, but you can see we have a section here, the general plan and the parking layout. This is the rendering. So we're proposing materials that are lighter and monochrome and have a warmth and texture. As you know, energy codes dictate the use of some advanced technology. So this would be panels, but I did bring samples if you're curious. You know, the inspiration is really limestone, but we're finding this Swiss Pearl project provides some very nice textured surfaces. Again, avoiding some of the darker colors that we've seen trendy in the past. And we want to combine this with literal real wood. This is thermo wood, which is natural wood, but that's been extreme heat treated. And we would use this in balcony areas. There's some elevations that show that a little bit clearer. But the idea is to take this volume and architecturally carve away, rather than have a box that we plug bays onto it, really use these forms to create interest, break up the volume, and do things like create balconies that are, instead of being plugged on, are really integrated into the form. You can see in this rendering how some very subtle moves also provide some shading, some depth and character onto the architecture. What we're seeing here also is at the corner of Angell and Brook. You'll notice that the front door is on Brook Street. So the address of the property would be Brook Street at the end of the day. What may not be apparent from this view is that our first floor is actually raised 4 feet off this corner. And so that's a split level lobby. You come in at grade, and then there's an elevator that gets you up to the first floor. And that's going to enable the structured parking that we'll talk about in a minute. But that also has the nice effect of raising that first floor so that people aren't looking directly in your windows. The other thing that you can see pretty clearly here is that we're picking up on the neighborhood pattern of retaining walls and planted vegetative buffers all around the perimeter on the right of way. And again, that's to match some of the more lushly planted neighborhood kind of pattern, but also to provide some screening for the residents. And we have to show a rendering in the tree because if we don't show the tree, people think we're taking away the tree. If we do show the tree, you can't see the building. So there it is with the tree across the way. This is the view from Phones Alley. So again, the site has right-of-ways on 3 different sides. This is to the south. So it's a smaller street. And you can see we're using that L of the building on the left to really hide the 3 spots for an EV charger, visitor spots, and a loading spot, which is required. Also, the lower left, you can see where that garage entrance is. one of the previous proposals had a driveway on Angell Street. I think this was very controversial because Angell is a fairly high-speed roadway. So all the traffic coming in and out is going to be on phones leads in both directions. And so if there is any kind of backup or congestion, there's some options to get through. The other things that we're seeing here is the trash and transformer areas are completely fenced with fence as high as we can make it. We're exploring options for compactors. There's some options for interior, exterior compactors to really minimize the amount of trash generated. And then on the right, you'll see we have a 21-foot setback from the side yard, which is technically a backyard. And the idea there is that a dog walk park, with some canine things so that people can walk their dogs safely at all hours. And then these are views from Angell on the left. So what you're seeing there is the Wheeler School campus to the right and Vedanta to the left of the building. And the right-hand image shows the building as you're going uphill from Brook Street. And we do have quite a significant drop. So from that angle, the building looks taller. From the other side, it looks shorter. But that drop and that slope of this site is actually really key to some of the dimensional adjustments that we're asking and frankly, our ability to provide structured parking. Okay, so these are elevations here, the differences in the different tones. You can see how there's a composition that starts to be created with the different textures, two different textures of panels, as well as different materials, all within a very subtle and hopefully elegant palette. And that breaks in the massing are achieved vertically through the use of largely glazed areas contrasting with more punched openings. Okay, so back to the front plan here, you can clearly see those setbacks on Angell Street. Brook Street, we're not asking for any kind of relief. The build to zone averages right at 7 feet, so we're allowed to build as close as 2, and as far as ways 12. We're proposing 5, which will give us a nice healthy planter on Brook Street. You can see the 3 surface parking spots and the loading dock. And then to the bottom right, you'll see the screened in transformer trash area. And you'll notice again, every single unit has a balcony. Every single unit is very large by a lot of proposals that the city has seen lately. Again, this is aiming at people who are used to a house that might be 2-3 times as large. So this is downsizing for a lot of folks. So it's on us to really provide all the amenities possible to make this a comfortable environment. So this is the parking plan. So we are providing more parking than is required. We are technically required to have 32 spaces. We are providing 45 plus the loading space. Out of these, 31 are full size, and this is all in your plans. You have this. 1 is for public EV charging, 2 are ADA compliant, and 14 are compact. The requirements are for 29 standard and 3 compact, so we're in excess of what we're required to provide. We also have our 7 required protected bicycle spaces. You'll notice towards the top of the page, kind of tucked in by the fire and water room right near the elevator for convenient access. So this structured parking is very important to understand because it is the basis for all the relief that we're asking and dimensional. So cars are a certain size, parking spaces are regulated to be a certain size, drive aisles are regulated to be a certain size. To get this parking to work, we needed to adjust the dimension slightly to get us a bit closer to Angell Street, have this extension down to Phones, and to bring us a little bit closer to the side yards. Again, we still have setbacks. We're not asking for the full setback, but that's the nature of that. And then we'll see in the section how it relates to the height and the lot coverage, which is we're asking for the 25% bonus incentive or adjustment that is listed along with the setbacks. Okay, and there's a diagram to clarify all those numbers. And again, this is in your package. Hey, I want to also mention that there is a limit to impervious area. We have our administrative relief on this. We have made every surface possible permeable, and we are also treating all stormwater on site. So quality and quantity, our civil engineers are here to give you more detail on that. But because this is not a typical feature in an RP zone, I think it's notable. It's required in larger, more commercial areas, but we're trying to be proactive about the impact of having impermeable area. I believe the previously developed site condition was within about 3% of where we will end up. So we're not dramatically increasing that, but what we are doing is taking that stormwater and holding it back. The meetings with DPW are very positive, and they have said that this will help them and certainly not impact negatively the kind of downstream effects that they're trying to deal with for this whole district. I also want to talk about the landscape plan. As the staff report notes, we're providing more canopy coverage with trees than we were required to. We also have quite a robust planting plan for all the reasons I mentioned, that is not actually required, but is part of this project. And then you can see how we're treating the dog run and the other grassy areas. As part of this plan, we're providing street trees, and the city has made it clear that the project needs to maintain those. And that is a commitment that the project will make, is to actually make sure they're pruned, fed, replaced if they happen to die. We do have a waiver for the final lighting plan. We do have a lighting design. We have light fixtures. You can see here, this is part of your package. We have specific model numbers and placement. And we also have a photometric plan. But the reason we need to ask for your waiver is that this photometric does not frankly include the wall packs that are against the public right of way. Just out of an abundance of caution, we want to ask for that waiver, but it's not that we haven't done the lighting design. We have no intention to put high street poles or traffic lights, lights lighting the parking areas. We have very low to the ground bollards and building mounted lights that are just a very gentle downlight. We've used this fixture on other projects. We have every confidence that we will meet the foot candle thresholds at the property lines, but we don't have our plan, all the I's dotted today. Okay, so let's talk about the height request. In the RP zone, as I'm sure you're aware, there's no limitation on height. It merely says 45 feet in height. And the state regulations around this say that this is from the average grade of where our proposed footprint meets the current conditions. So you can't cheat it by building up a little height or digging a hole. You have to take the ground where it is today. And so we have that survey information. That point is a couple feet below Angell Street, and it's a couple feet above Phones Alley. Where basically the zoning allows 45 feet from that average grade. So that's more like 43 feet from Angell Street, a bit more. If you were to build a building up that's starting with grade at Phones Alley, it could be 5 stories above grade with not too much trouble at all. We only point this out to show what is allowed by right and why we're asking for dimensional adjustments. We'll cover this in some of the community comments, but you could build by right, rental student housing. It could have 24 4-bedroom units. It would need 24 surface parking spots. It could be 5 stories above grade, and it would not require a public hearing at all. The Department of Planning and Development could approve that administratively without a single comment or meeting with the public. We've had many meetings with the public. We don't think this is what is appropriate for the neighborhood at this stage, and certainly not what we want to build. But it's also helpful to understand why we are asking for it. So we still want to build those 5 stories, but we want to tuck in the parking and really take advantage of the sloping site. We only have to drop down about 2.5 feet from Phones Alley and are able to get a full height of story parking. And that's what gets us over the required parking spaces. That also takes advantage of us raising the first floor. So it's a height request of 12 feet above the 45 feet. And again, it's a little bit lower on Angell, a little bit more on Phones Alley. Okay, so one of the other things we prepared is this analysis of heights of buildings directly on the street as well as in the nearby. Again, this is in your package. Happy to explain, but I know we have a lot to cover today. So, but I think showing the relative scale within the property is always helpful. And then this massing diagram, you can see our proposed building is in the slightly darker gray. Some of the buildings from Brown University are in the foreground, and many of the buildings that have been developed along Brook Street stretching to the north. Okay, so finally, I want to address, a lot of the conversations we've been having with stakeholders, abutters, community members. We've had no less than 10 meetings and presentations, mostly in person, starting with residential abutters, institutions, moving on to neighborhood groups, other special interest groups. culminating in a Zoom webinar that we held with specific invitations sent to College Hill Neighborhood Association and Wayland Square Neighborhood Association, but open to everybody. We had very good participation. We had about 50 people attend. And it both reiterated some of the concerns we'd heard in earlier meetings, and we wanted to show you this slide. I'm not going to walk you through every single minute that I know it's a long evening, but I want to highlight at least 3 of these. First and foremost, many of the abutters were very concerned that this would become a rental student housing project. And no matter how many times we say, no, it's condominiums, it's aimed at empty nester, this is a condominium project, no intention to rent to student housing. I think we wanted to have some assurance that it would not become a situation where parents say might buy a unit for their child and then they go out and create parties. And the concern really is undergraduate students, but the real concern is parties and disruptive behavior. So what we have offered, and you'll see it in the staff report, is we wrote out a set of conditions that we hope are going to address some of those concerns, because frankly, they are the exact same concerns that anybody who buys into this building is going to have. Nobody wants to live next to a disruptive environment, to have neighbors that are unruly. So we've offered to impose on us a condition that no undergraduate student rental be permitted and just baked into the project approval. Additionally, since you don't have to be an undergrad to have noisy parties, we have the ability to have a condominium board that frankly, I think will be self-regulating. In a rental situation, it's a different dynamic. You have a property management company that may or may not be incentivized to kick people out, and they have to find new tenants. In an ownership situation, and speaking from experience, our office is part of a condominium group about this size. It's self-enforcing, and you develop rules. So imposing a fine of $500 per incident for noise violations, whether they're student or not. And then because graduate students is a bit of a different beast. There's some arguments pro and con, and we'd like to suggest that the condo board itself have the ability to either stop that or allow it. So the student rental housing, again, we do not want student rental housing here. That is not what we're proposing, and definitely our interests are aligned with the neighborhood on that front. Some of these are very self-explanatory. I want to just highlight again, the delivery area. Having stopped vehicles on Brook Street or Angell Street would be very problematic, especially in our conversations with Wheeler School. We are going to, carefully coordinate our times of construction with the pickup and drop off. But then after that, making sure that the traffic that develops around their pickup and drop off time, really by moving everything to Phones Alley, we're hoping to mitigate that. And again, this is not going to be a high traffic situation. It is all residential. There are no retail or office components here. And frankly, we predict that many people will either be remote work, walk to work at Brown if they work, or be retired. And then finally, want to highlight energy and resilience. It is a particular interest of our firm to advance zero energy goals. We're right now working on a building that is going to be one of the first zero net energy buildings in the state. It's 176 units. We have a lot of experience not only with the energy codes, but also the incentive programs that hopefully will still be in place. Our goal would be to be all electric. There's definitely challenges around that. But I think the next threshold after meeting these new robust energy codes is to get to all renewables. If you're not familiar with the brand new energy codes that just became mandatory this February, on-site solar is required. And if you can't do on-site solar on your own rooftop, you have to contract for that off-site. For example, you have to provide the ability for residents to charge their electric vehicles on-site. The formula for mandating efficiency has really made it so that what we need to do just to meet building code is far and away above what we would have to do even 10 years ago. So all the things that we were advancing have really moved the needle, and it's now standard practice. So that will help ensure that this is a more sustainable building. I'm happy to answer lots of questions about that, but I won't right now. Right now, I'll turn it over to Ed.
Excuse me. Thank you very much. So piggybacking on Christine's testimony, it's pretty
well recognized in your comprehensive plan, right? That the one mandate is we have a housing crisis and we need housing. And it speaks to trying to discover parcels like these infill parcels that can accommodate higher density. So where I concentrated my energy was on the uniqueness of the property and doing a neighborhood analysis on the unique aspect of this neighborhood and why this property is so appropriate for the development, which then leads in turn to the appropriateness of the adjustments. First of all, what are the unique site features? As Christina has already well testified to, we have a property that is in excess of 19,500 square feet of total upland resources, constraint-free. It's an anomaly to find a lot of this size in a dense neighborhood that's unimproved. It is, in any community of this kind of this urban scale. Number two, a lot fronts on 3 streets. Why is this such an important feature? Because it allowed us to introduce a building that could be constructed to streetscape and allow us ability to provide ingress and egress from the back street of Bones Alley, where there is much less reduced vehicular and pedestrian activity, and yet maintain that pedestrian scale on the other 2 main roads. As Christina has stated from the prior proposal, the last thing you wanted to do was introduce additional curb cuts on major thoroughfares. And we were able to accomplish this because we have access to 3 public rights of way, and we concentrate everything on Bones Alley. The third feature that was really unique to the property is the sloping topography. It drops off approximately 6 feet from Angell Street all the way back to Bones. So in so doing, we were able to relocate and introduce structured parking, having access from Bones, visually screening parking, because nobody wants that to be the visual focal point, and yet keep the massing and scale from the pedestrian to a pedestrian scale at both Angell Street and Brook. What that also allowed us to do as well is to provide additional parking. I know it's an admirable position that the city holds in trying to maximize usage of areas where there's too much surface parking, even structured parking, right? Land is too valuable to be allocating to parking. But if you can incorporate much needed parking into a development where you can still accommodate the massing and scale and maximize its usage for residential purposes, you obviously should accomplish that. Because then what that does is it doesn't detract from parking from other sources that is going to be required. It's a dense, mixed-use, commercial, residential, and institutional area. And the last thing we want to do is then further exacerbate potential parking problems. And that's what we're avoiding. So we were able to maximize usage of this property, provide much needed residential development, provide necessary parking to meet our needs, and do it in a manner, as Christine, the architect, has already testified to, in a very eloquent and pedestrian level scale proposed manner. The other reason why I was brought on board too was to speak to the adjustments and the regulatory appropriateness of those adjustments. This property, for your comprehensive plan, and I think it was done purposely, to be honest, if you see the arrows I put on my report, the area is kind of bifurcated by a classification of the neighborhood commercial and the higher density residential, and then this surrounded by medium density residential, institutional, and just a convergence of a variety of zoning designations and land use classifications. But I think this was done purposely because I think the comprehensive plan recognized that this was a transitional property. This property should be residential, but taking into consideration that it abuts all these mixture of land uses. I mean, the institutional allows up to 75 feet. Do we want a 75-foot establishment here? No. Do we want something a little smaller? Probably not. We want that transitional massing and scale because it can be accommodated. It allows for higher density residential, and then it blends in. Because when you go from west to east down Angell is where it transitions to more pure residential. The scale, the massing, and the intensity of usage also gets less. So it was my humble professional opinion that given all these variety and unique elements of this property, both site-wise and, like I said, convergence of the different zoning designations, land use classifications, the different massing and scale and intensity of variety of uses, that this property could very well accommodate. And I thought the adjustments were very appropriate. In support of that, I also did a neighborhood analysis, whereas Christine, of course, obviously did it more from a massing and scale and architectural. I went out and did a land use analysis on every single parcel in
all the surrounding blocks, reviewed every tax card and applied all the data. I looked at all the gross floor area, living area, footprint, what the impervious coverage, and the reason why this was to then, so that I could actually, and speak to this board, that what we're talking about is something that fits in with the character of the neighborhood. I don't know, I need to introduce this, it's referenced in the report, but,
You haven't submitted that, and submit it as an exhibit. Yeah.
so I got 2 copies for the board.
We'll also reference that your report is included as a part of the record for this application, and we've received it in advance and all had a chance.
It is, and what I did for that, Mr. Chairman, was that I referenced this analysis, and then I gave the averages in the report, but just in case somebody's wondering where the backup data is, that's where it came from. So, having said all of that, well, I'm gonna get into the, right, into the, so starting on all of that, I went, and like I said, I did my neighborhood analysis. I poured right through the comprehensive plan, excerpted a lot of information, a lot of goals and objectives. Page 17 of 26 summarizes my neighborhood analysis. And then commencing on that page is when I got into the specific requirements that we need to satisfy this board. Number 1, this is under the land development project applicability. It talks about why we need to pursue a minor land development project. It's referenced in there. I then went through the specific purposes of the ordinance and the land development regulations, and as to how we meet each of those requirements. Getting into about the built environment, the area is already well built up surrounding this property. This really truly is the perfect infill lot to accommodate this intensity of usage at the massing and scale we propose. Then I get into all of the different requirements for the granting of the land development project. I was also asked to get into the specifics of it, and then going in through the housing element. It was very interesting in the supporting data. So over the last several decades, the Providence has been very accommodating in residential development. That speaks for itself. But what's been interesting is that the multitude of units that are being developed have been all sort of in the smaller range. The smaller non-bedroom suites, the 1 and 2 bedrooms. The only category that has not grown at the same scale and percentage is the 3 or greater bedrooms. It's a need in the market. Massachusetts literally just passed a law under their 40Bs, which would be what we would be defining as our affordable housing statute in Rhode Island, that a certain percentage of all affordable housing in Mass now must be family units, or must be units with a greater number of bedrooms to accommodate a variety of scale of individuals. Those that are downsizing, empty nesters, someone who may have a child, whatever it may be, because we're concentrating too much in one avenue as reflected here. So that is why we're providing this product. And then I was also asked to get into speak to the section 802, which was the to do with impacts. Obviously, traffic can be spoken to by the engineers, but I referenced the natural environment, the built environment. That's why I did my neighborhood analysis. That's why I thoroughly reviewed all the surrounding land use classifications and zoning designations, what would otherwise be permitted. As Christina's already noted, the adjustment is to height, not to anything else. We could build something that would be more intrusive and intensive, a product that is not welcome, and a product that probably would not be suitable for this neighborhood. So we're trying to concentrate on a built-in natural environment that's conducive to this neighborhood and to the needs of the community. I don't know if you want to get me into any of these other requirements.
Again, we've noted that this will be included as a part of the application. It's also on the website. We got this in advance, so I just want to ask one clarifying question. Don't put your report away yet, Ed. Page 21. Goes to show I read all the materials before I come to the meeting. Under L, the last paragraph on that. This project does not necessitate several adjustments, plural. So I think you want to strike the not.
I will strike that.
And then the second to last sentence, which is most important instead of not important. Those are the only copy editing
Which one?
issues that I saw. The third line from the bottom, middle, which is moat important.
Oh, sorry about that.
Most.
I could read this as many times as you want. There's just too much in there. and I'm
I
gonna
understand.
do something.
That's why I like to do so.
Mr.
I don't,
Chair.
I mean, obviously, I know the planning commission knows who I am, but I didn't know if you, I brought resumes if you needed to be into the record.
Nope, not at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to be clear, maybe we misheard you, Ed. The dimensional adjustments are for height and setback.
Right, so if you go to the final page of my report, which falls under,
26 of 26.
so, right, so the findings for the dimensional adjustments for land development projects, which would be section, that's subsection B. The last page actually annotates the different adjustments that are required. And they are required. I'm like, what the reports, correct, accidentally said. And they fall in line with the ability to be treated as adjustments and not variances.
Thank you for that clarification.
Oh, I'm sorry, and obviously we have the project engineers here.
Oh, yes.
And the principal, if you need to ask, speak, ask it in each question.
It's your show, so if you think there's anything necessary, I think Christine did a great job.
Yeah. We
Summarizing.
didn't think it was necessary, but they're here in case you have any questions, whether it's the owner or the engineers.
Yeah, I think Christine laid out the site features well already. Obviously, commissioners, questions of the applicant.
Well, I want to say, well, first of all, thank you for meeting with the community. It's something that we always try to encourage. And I like the, PDF you provided with the issues and what you propose to address that. I'm just curious to, and this is anticipatory too, because I'm looking, well, there's not too many people, but there might be some questions that come up. So about some of the issues that did arise where you weren't able to come to a conclusion, and what are those issues and what did you attempt, or, was it realistic? I don't know.
Yeah, so here's that response. It's a good question. I think respond, to, everything really that was asked. I mean, there's a lot of questions that are asked without necessarily demands, right? So you've got to understand that. And just to be realistic about this, I was hedging a little on all electric. It's absolutely our intent to have an all electric property. Electric heat and cool, absolutely easy to do. When you want to take people's gas stoves away, that can be a real problem. So we need to make sure that we're not ruining our chances to sell these to people. Personally, I will give a personal demonstration of the induction unit. It is amazing. It's so responsive. You can boil water in like 2 minutes flat. It's phenomenal. It's so much better than a gas stove and so much healthier. So I will do my best, but people love their gas stoves. So that's why it's 99% electric, I think, is a more realistic target on that. So that's one example of the concerns where, we'll work towards it. But I think it was a good discussion, and I think it really helped highlight, like I already mentioned, the trash and compactors. It's a design priority, thinking about how that moves from your unit to the trash room to the outside and gets picked up in a truck, and how much is it, who's moving it, that sort of thing. So it's great to be able to have those issues come up and discuss them.
Well, no, thanks. And as previously said, I was here for Michael as well, and a lot of the concerns that I recall from that meeting have been addressed. And while I encourage public testimony, we love it, the fact that the room is as empty as it is tells me that many things must have been addressed, because we usually would have expected a lot more for this site.
This is not a neighborhood that normally stays quiet at our meetings.
Yes, so,
Maybe.
And we haven't gotten to public comment yet, so we may be speaking too soon.
true.
Commissioners, do you have other questions of the applicant?
I have two questions. One is about parking. It looks like a number of the spaces are stacked. So is the intent that one owner would use, or how is that gonna work?
Yeah, you don't have to share a tandem spot with your neighbor. We're aware that that could be like trading keys. It's no good. So we have enough for all 32 units to have their own dedicated spot or spots. You know, and obviously these can be sold or arranged separately. We expect that a property manager will be in charge of assigning spots to people. But yeah, no key trading like, you know, everybody who has a driveway where people are parking on thing are used to doing.
Okay, and then my second question is, can you pass around the sample?
Yeah, absolutely.
Materiality. Sid, Dave, Noel, I know, Dave, you probably want to chime in because she took the wind out of your sails.
Not really. I big plus, big thumbs up for induction stoves too, but I understand the marketing conditions that, you know, require some people yet to not see the light. So I appreciate that you're meeting. Some of the things we hear is from the city, the folks in the city, climate, very important, climate goals, also affordable housing. So I've got a question for you. I'm assuming there's no affordable units in this building.
That's correct. I mean, different people's income can afford different things, but no income restricted. That's for sure.
Understood. So I ask this question occasionally, and I appreciate, I'm a developer and I want you to make money. We want developers to make money in Providence, at least I do. Yeah. But I'd like to know if there would be anything, you know, speaking as to help inform us, would there be anything that could be offered to incentivize some affordable units at this site? Because I think it's a good spot for some if it was possible. I'm not saying it is, but could you maybe help inform us what that might be?
Yeah,
If we could, you know, moving forward, how that could.
I have
create a little bit for that.
so many ideas. We don't have enough time tonight, but I'll share a couple of thoughts. You know, one, it's important to understand that as a condominium project for rental, about 10, 15 years ago, the city had some programs where some affordable for purchase units, Onahasset Mills, I believe, some others. It was very, very difficult on the back end when those initial purchasers wanted to sell. How do you get that equity? You know, part of home ownership is to build that equity and contribute to your personal wealth, where if you have to sell to an income restricted buyer, not only are you giving up that ability to build equity, but your buyer has to now thread the needle between qualifying for a mortgage, yet not having an income too high. So a for sale, affordable product, incredibly difficult. I don't know the way out of that one unless there's some type of fund like the Brown to Brown program works, where they absorb the loss by transferring properties among professors. I think reform and having a substitute for the 8 law, like, absolutely needs to be in place. And one of the reasons why I don't think any private developer can really seriously plan on it right now is because the administration has, you know, rightfully questioned how good the current 8 law is. And certainly there was an effort last year to change it. I know the efforts to have a replacement policy are underway. It's in limbo now, right? So I think having an effective policy, and for those who don't know what the 8 law was, it was essentially a property tax exemption for properties that included a small portion of affordable housing. The criticism was that it was applied to the whole building and was maybe too generous. So I think there needs to be a balanced approach, but certainly taxation policy is a big part of it. There are institutions like Providence Revolving Fund, which, you know, do an amazing job at providing the private development market with pre-development loans, with very competitive construction phase loans, with permanent financing, but they are also mission restricted to historic properties and neighborhoods. I think they really are very well run. I was proud to be on their board for a while. And expanding their capital pool would be another way for the private market to do what the nonprofit market deals with, which is the federal low income tax credit situation, which super competitive and very, very hard to be eligible for. So, you know, there's other ideas, you know, again, happy to sit down and share them offline, but it would be incredibly challenging for this project to include those. And again, community sentiment, you know, rallies around the project's, you know, origins, which this is a condominium project, not rental. I think it's much easier to do in a rental situation where you do have market rents. You're looking at a different turnover rates. You're looking at a different management strategy and a different enforcement mechanisms. So don't know if you answered that, but
Long answer.
yeah, sorry.
Noel, do you have any questions? Okay. Commissioners?
I have one more question. With the thermally modified wood, are you anticipating that it's gonna gray significantly? Or are you gonna treat it? I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts on that.
I don't think we have a final decision on that. As a thermally modified wood, it's going to last a lot longer, and our intent would be to have a finish on there. If you have an oil finish, it will last a good 5 years, and I think we would want to implement a maintenance plan to make sure that everything aged consistently. You'll see that on the elevation that the areas where it's placed are semi-exposed. They're not in direct exposure to rain. And as you know, that is going to help prevent the weathering of a lot of this. So I think if it was all on the complete outside face, I think the grayness would be something that we would just work with and lean into, but I think we have a shot at protecting and maintaining that kind of very rich wood color on the interior.
Great. Anything else, Charlotte, or is? Sid? Miguel, anything else? We always reserve the right to call the applicant back after we have questions, but, anything else, Counselor?
Not at this time.
All right, then with that, let's hear the staff report and, move on to public comment.
Okay. Commissioners, you'll see in your staff report, we give an overview and we describe the project in detail. I'm going to jump right into the impacts, which are on the start on the 4th page. So, as you know, your development review regulations allow you to make the zoning ordinance and your development review regulations allow you to make dimensional adjustments. And these adjustments are when certain things are provided by the developer as specified in the regulations. In section in Article 8, you are allowed to consider impacts on the natural environment, the built environment, and traffic when reviewing the request for dimensional adjustments. So we speak to that in the staff report, and we believe that they have adequately addressed any concerns about the natural environment through their stormwater management plan and their tree planting plan. Also, with respect to noise, which is an environmental impact, any concerns about noise from students, we think have been adequately addressed through the proposed condition that they've included. And if you approve this, that would be a condition that would be recorded with the final plan. With respect to the built environment, we think this is the most important impact that needs to be addressed. And as described, they have provided an analysis of the surrounding neighborhood. We know that this site is in the RP zone, but it's right up against C2 to the west, C1 to the south, which will become C2 in a few days, R3 to the north, but it's important to note that R3 zone contains the Wheeler School, which has larger institutional buildings, and then the RP it should say to the east. Well, it's RP to the east. These zones are to the west, north, so forth. So the height and massing of the buildings is comparable to what is being proposed in this direct area. The report also finds that the intensity of development drastically decreases moving eastward from the lot, which we agree with. As you move eastward, the zone stays the same along Angell Street, but the building massing decreases. By the time you get to Hope Street, it's basically 3-story houses, whereas on Brook Street, you have a lot of very large institutional buildings of, many of which are 4, 5, and higher stories. So we believe that, that the applicant's analysis of the neighborhood and the immediate environment around this, parcel of land is correct. So with that, based on their report, based on our analysis, we think that a negative impact on the built environment is not expected, as the mass and scale of the building will conform to the character of the immediate surroundings. With respect to traffic, we have reviewed this with the city engineer, who has determined that a negative impact on traffic is not expected, as the existing street network will adequately handle traffic generated by the development. We think that it's that they have thoughtfully put all vehicular access onto Phones Alley, which very much serves as a service alley to all the buildings that front along this block of Angell Street and along Waterman. It's nice that this development doesn't have any curb cuts on Brook Street or Angell Street. So we think that that's the perfect design for this type of building. Okay, so then we want to get into the findings that you're required to make for, first of all, the waiver. They have asked for that for the photometric lighting plan. I think they've demonstrated that they're working in good faith to get there. They have a consultant who's developing this, who hasn't finished the work yet, although they have presented us with partial findings. We fully expect that they will comply with the requirements in the zoning ordinance. So we believe that granting this waiver would be in the interest of good planning practice and allow for the review to proceed in conformance with section 1006 of the development review regulations. The waiver should be granted, subject to the condition that the applicant submit a conforming lighting plan at the final plan stage. Next, you're required to make findings with respect to dimensional adjustments. These would be for height, corner side setback, building coverage, and rear yard setback per section 1005B of the development review regulations. The requested adjustments are within the allowable limits that can be granted by the CPC in accordance with the zoning ordinance. The applicant is eligible for the adjustments per section 1904 E1H of the zoning ordinance through the provision of structured parking. The structured parking, which occupies all of the cellar level, is reasonably related to the additional height and building coverage requirements based on the testimony in the report submitted by the applicant. The DPD finds that the applicant has satisfactorily addressed the criteria for adjustments and recommends that you grant the requested adjustments. Then we get into the findings for preliminary plan. First is consistency with the comprehensive plan. And we have said this time and time again, that the future land use map is intended to have blurry lines. The distinction between land use designations is intended not to be super clear, so that it could justify some nuance in zoning changes and also in your ability to review projects. This lot is at the intersection of neighborhood commercial, high density residential, and medium density residential. Those are the land use designations. Multifamily is absolutely suitable within all of these designations, especially high density and neighborhood commercial. This development provides housing with a public amenity of structured parking, conforms with this designation. And we believe it also conforms with objective H2 of the comprehensive plan, which encourages construction of new housing. Compliance with the zoning ordinance is finding number 2. This is permitted by right in the RP zone. Multifamily is allowed. The dimension of the development will conform to the ordinance to the dimensional requirements of the ordinance, subject to you granting the requested dimensional adjustments. They have also received administrative modification for impervious surface coverage. And this would be subject to the applicant submitting a compliant lighting plan at the final plan stage. They meet the parking requirement. With respect to landscaping, they'll meet the canopy coverage requirement. The planting of street trees shall be subject to the city forester's approval, and we'll speak later that one condition the forester wants to see is that they be responsible for the maintenance of the street trees as they are required to meet their canopy coverage requirement. And then finally, they've requested the waiver from the photometric plan. Environmental impact, the drainage plan shall be subject to the city engineer's review. I think they've given us a drainage report. Julian, it says here, shall be submitted prior to final plan approval. Do we have a complete drainage plan, or is that?
Yeah.
That's.
Sorry, what I meant is the approval shall be.
The approval, yes, okay, thank you. The approval shall be submitted prior to final plan approval. No significant negative impacts, environmental impacts are expected. If the applicant is expected to come into conformance with applicable environmental regulations. With respect to buildable lot, there are no physical constraints that impact development of this property, as the lot will comply with the dimensional requirements of the RP zone. The applicant is required to obtain any encroachment permits at the permitting stage. And finally, street access, adequate vehicular and pedestrian access is provided from Brook and Angel Streets and Phones Alley. I just want to make a statement. You may hear there was a consultant's report submitted by a representative of kind of butter. There are two issues that are raised that I think are worthy of comment. One is about curb cuts. Their original submission did have two curb cuts shown in the back off of Phones Alley. We notified the applicant even prior to this abutters report coming in that the RP zone allows for the multifamily in RP zone. Basically, you can have one curb cut. That's the existing condition. It's one long curb cut off of Phones Alley. That's pretty much the existing condition for all of Phones Alley. Not all of it, but most of it. We advised the applicant that if they want to comply, they should essentially leave the curb as it is, where there's a return coming around from Brook Street. It just dead ends, and then the rest is open. The city engineer accepted that as an existing condition, and we believe that fully complies with zoning. There's another comment in the abutters report that speaks to the fact that for this type of development, all vehicular traffic should be oriented so that it doesn't back out into the public way. They have I think it's 2 spaces, 3 spaces, and a loading zone where you can pull in directly off of Phones Alley. Now, our position on this is that Phones Alley is a little bit of a different kind of public right of way than Brook Street or Angel Street. It really is intended to be a service alley with low traffic. We don't believe that there is any hazard from vehicles that are going to be backing into Phones Alley. Nevertheless, if the applicant mandates that with those 3 parking spaces that vehicles are required to back in so that they can pull directly out, heading forwards into Phones Alley, that would certainly comply with the regulation. We don't see that is something that would be a violation of the zoning ordinance. That's been confirmed by the zoning official. Okay, and then finally, we'd like you to take 3 actions on this. The first is the waiver, granting the waiver for submission of a photometric plan. with the condition that it be submitted with the final plan. We advise you to grant the dimensional adjustments, finding that they meet the criteria for dimensional adjustments, and having made positive findings, as I mentioned earlier. And then finally, we would advise you to approve the preliminary plan, subject to the following conditions. 1, the drainage plan shall be subject to the city engineer's approval. 2, the planting of the street trees shall be subject to the city forester's approval, and the applicant shall be responsible for maintenance of all proposed street trees. 3, in accordance with the applicant's offer regarding student housing, 3 conditions: rental of dwelling units to undergraduate students shall be prohibited. Undergraduate college students may live in owner-occupied units. 2, rental to graduate students shall only be allowed upon majority vote of the condominium association. 3, fines of $500 per incident for disruptive behavior or excessive noise in alignment with city noise ordinances shall be imposed and waivable only by a majority vote of the condominium board. Condition number 4, any required encroachment permits shall be submitted at the permitting stage. And condition number 5, final plan approval shall be delegated to DVD staff.
Okay, thank you, Bob. With that, we've been here for a little while, so let's, before we open it up to public comment, we'll take just a 10-minute quick break, use the restroom facilities, and then we will come back here at 6:40. So we will be in recess for 11 minutes now. All right, good evening. We'll call this meeting back to order. Please take your seats. At this point, we were going to open this meeting up to public comment. As normal, we'll have a time clock here for time limits. If you are joining us virtually, please raise your virtual hand or press *9. The first person we're going to call up has already submitted materials about this application. It's an opponent of this project, represented by John Garrity. So we're gonna call them up first, and we'll allow them a little bit more time. We're not gonna start the time clock for this gentleman. We've already spoken with them about that. Mr. McLean, I also read yours as well, just so you know. I highlighted stuff and marked it up, so.
Great.
You don't feel like I only did it for ads. I read yours also.
Looking for all those edits.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we noticed that you read the report by your particular note of punctuation. You want me to proceed?
Please do.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, John Garrity, on behalf of Walter Brownhart, who's a butter. He owns the Carlisle located at 116 Waterman Street. As members of this commission know, I've appeared here many times, sometimes on Mr. Brownhart's behalf for projects, on behalf of others. As an applicant, we are here as an opponent this time. And I will say that, you know, Mr. Brownhart has a significant interest in this neighborhood, owning the Carlisle, owning 108 Waterman, owning 130 Waterman, which I'm going to talk a little bit about as well, which is on 130 Waterman. It's just up the street on a very similar sized lot to the subject project here. He has 12 units on that in an RP zone. So it's very similar, both from a size and from the zoning designation. And he has 12 units on that. He struggled with that for a long time in order to have it comply with the zoning ordinance. And he did a couple of different iterations over there. And it was difficult, frankly, to comply with the zoning ordinance in order to get to 12 units. And I think that's going to be one of my points with respect to this project, overburdening the land. I will say that Mr. Brownhart is very active in this neighborhood. Sometimes we've agreed with a lot of the neighbors here. Sometimes we haven't. Sometimes the neighbors have opposed our projects. Sometimes we've agreed with them. We joined forces with the neighbors to oppose the hotel that was proposed for the site because we thought it was overburdening the land. We think this project is overburdening the land. And Mr. Brownhart asked Doug to do an analysis of the project. He did a very thorough, as you know, and he's going to speak to those points. And I'm going to leave most of my time to him in order to explain why he thinks that this project is too big and not consistent with the neighborhood. And I think that, you know, Walter has an interest in it, and that's why we're here. He does have a significant interest in this neighborhood to make sure that it's consistent with the neighboring land uses and that it's not overly congested. We think that this will provide significant congestion to this area, and that's why we're here. Let me talk about a couple of things. Let me talk about the difference between the C zone and the RP zone. So, as has been indicated, this abuts the C zone. Brook Street is the dividing line between the C zone and the RP zone. There is a difference between the zones, and there should be a difference between the zones. Just because they're adjacent to the C zone doesn't mean that this becomes a C project. But that is essentially what has happened. By allowing all of these adjustments, you've essentially created a C zone across the street. But let me just say something, but there are some obligations with respect to the C zone that do not apply to this project because it's in the RP zone. For example, there's a street requirement that there be no residential and no parking within 20 feet of a main street. Angell Street, Brook Street, Waterman Street in our case, so that there can be no residential within 20 feet of that, of the main street. That applies to the C zone. It does not apply to the RP zone. So they get the benefit. Both the Thayer Street Management District and the city say they have an interest in making sure that this is a pedestrian-friendly area. And as a result, they require that there be some commercial, thank you. I'll try to be quick. So essentially, they require that there be no residential or no parking within the 20 feet of the street line in the C zone, which my client has because he's in the C zone. This project is not subject to that. Is that important to the city or isn't it? So, they're not required. They could put some shops in there. They could put pedestrian-friendly shops in the front. They've chosen not to do that. So all of a sudden, because they're in the RP zone, they're not subject to that requirement. Let me talk about parking. 45 parking spaces for 32 units is excessive. And it's my belief that it will create more traffic congestion along Waterman, Angell, and Brook, where there's already lots of cars and pedestrians. So this is going to exit onto Brook Street, and where now there's essentially nobody coming out. So now you're going to have a development with 45 units and those cars. The city has back and forth, and Bob has talked about, well, maybe we should have less parking requirements. Maybe we should have more parking requirements. So essentially, I would suggest to you that where you have more parking spaces, it's more problematic than less here. So if you have many adjustments, but one of the adjustments you don't have is for parking. So you could reduce parking because of by 50%. They're not doing that. They're creating more parking spaces than is required. So with respect to the Carlisle at 116 Waterman Street, there are 25 units, but there's no parking there. So there's no congestion created as a result of that building. But this is a totally different situation where now you have 45 parking spaces entering Brook Street at Fonz Alley. The adjustments, and I'm going to try to be very quick, the adjustments, and whenever I go, I always say whenever I come here, and this board knows it, the more compliant the project, the better it is, the easier it's going to be to get through. This is true both here and with respect to the zoning boards. We are discouraged. The more variances we have for a particular project, we have the pre-app meetings, and we have a lot of variances. Frankly, we're discouraged, and maybe rightfully so, because the more variances you have, the more adjustments you require, the less you're consistent with the comp plan, the zoning ordinance, and the built environment. So I would suggest to you, because you need so many adjustments for this project, you need an impervious variance for the project, that maybe it's just not consistent. One of the biggest adjustments that they're asking for, I would suggest, is for coverage. So all of a sudden, they're creating a bigger footprint for the building to create more units. So you're asking for a lot of adjustments, which should tell you that it's not consistent with the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, or the built environment. One of the issues that I want to bring up is the low to moderate income housing. This project does not include any low to moderate income housing. With respect to adjustments, my experience, I think they should be more related. If you get an amenity, you should get an adjustment, and it should be objective. This obviously, the way that this ordinance is written, they're not related to each other. But one of the things I've always told with respect to more adjustments, and particularly in the commercial zone where you're entitled to add two stories to it, that really we're only going to grant you one floor unless you have low to moderate income units included. So in this case, you have a stacking of adjustments, but you only have one amenity, the structured parking. So, you know, we don't have low to moderate income, you have one amenity, and you're getting many adjustments. That does not seem to be consistent with the intent of the statute, which created these incentives, or with the ordinance itself. So, and with this policy of this board to essentially say, if you want more adjustments, you gotta provide low to moderate income housing or some other amenity included within it. And with respect to that, I would notice, and the required findings with respect to adjustments is a new one that was just added, and I think I know why it was added. But it's the requirement is that the extent of the adjustment is reasonably related to the condition that makes the project eligible for dimensional adjustment. So there's some type of a extent, how much do we get, how much is there? It's related to why the project is eligible. Now, in my mind, the project is eligible because of structured parking in this instance. So why do they get lot coverage? Why do they get setbacks? Why do they get height? There has to be some correlation, and I'd suggest to you that there is no correlation. Let me end there, but let me just say this. A critical element of the zoning ordinance for owners and neighbors is certainty and transparency. If different property within the same zone is subject to different rules and discretionary rules, that is subjective rules, it becomes arbitrary and capricious. And that's not the way that the zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan should be proceeded. So at this point, I'm going to ask Doug to make his presentation. I'm sorry if I went a little long, but let me say with respect to Doug, Mr. Chairman, I have his resume here, and I know it's not your process unless it's unified development to qualify people as experts, but I'd like to have his resume a part of the record and as an exhibit in this matter. I'd like to also have his report, which was submitted prior to this, to be an exhibit in this matter, and I would ask that it be incorporated into his testimony as they're fully provided.
Yeah, we'll accept that, and his resume is attached to his report at the end. It's all on the website, available on the website, and it is part of this matter. Okay. So thank you.
So Doug, I'd ask you to give your name and a little brief introduction about very briefly about your qualifications so that the board knows about your qualifications, and then a summary of your report, please.
Sure. I'll do the 10-second version on the qualifications. I've been a professional planner in Rhode Island for almost 2 decades. I have my planning certification. I've been working in municipal work for, almost that full 2 decades. I've been with North Kingstown, South Kingstown, Cranston, and I'm currently the planning director in Coventry. I appeared before this board just about 2 months ago. That was my first time here in Providence. So I think that summarizes me. If you guys have any questions, otherwise I'm happy to go right into my analysis.
Please do.
Great. So, first off, good evening to the members of the Providence City Plan Commission. I'm asking the staff, would you be willing to put my report, if you have it digitally, up on the screen? Is that possible, Bob? Yes. Thank you very much. As I begin, I'd just like to note, I have a great deal of respect for the planning staff here and the work of the Plan Commission. And I did review all of the work of the applicants and the city staff report. It's clear that I do see this project very differently. And I'd like to just point those areas out now. I'd like to provide a very high level overview. You've got my report available. And my goal tonight is just to touch on 3 main topics. One is a neighborhood compatibility analysis. The next is a comprehensive plan assessment. And then the third is code compliance issues that I've identified, and generally how this project measures up to the standards of review for a minor land development. So as far as neighborhood compatibility analysis, thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate that. As far as neighborhood compatibility analysis, as discussed, the applicant seeking five-dimensional adjustments to achieve a building that's much larger than allowed through the baseline zoning standards. And these adjustments are being requested in exchange for one of the required provisions called for in the code, which is structured parking. You know, there's no hard and fast rule about the number of adjustments you can achieve compared to the number of amenities you provide. But, you know, it does seem as though this project opens up the potential for an over-intensification of the project in ways that you're not getting the amenities that the city has intended through its code and through the comprehensive plan. Again, and you know, Mr. Guerra, he noted that one of the key findings of the dimensional adjustments is the extent of the dimensional adjustment is reasonably related to the condition that makes the project eligible. In this case, that's the structured parking. In my opinion, the applicant has not met this finding, as the requested adjustments are to make the building more massive and taller, and that's not related to the structured parking. The applicant is in fact over parking the site. They're required to provide 32 spaces. They're providing 45. And in my opinion, the applicant could reduce the size and the height of the building. They could reduce the footprint of the structured parking facility and still meet their parking needs without reliance on the dimensional adjustments. So there isn't a reasonable connection between needing the structured parking and needing the building to be this big and this tall. As a next point, the five adjustments has led to a significantly larger footprint and a significantly taller building than the other buildings in the surrounding neighborhood. And to be honest, it's not particularly close based on my quantitative analysis. Bob, if you would not mind going to page 6 on that report, you'll see a table on that. One more page. That's it. And it's not all going to fit there. You know, maybe you could reduce the size a touch, but I mean, mostly I just want to call attention to this. It's in the report. You've had a chance to review this already. I did a very systematic quantitative approach to this. I looked at every single lot within 200 feet of the subject lot. The average building coverage percentage of the 24 surrounding lots is 45%. That means on average, out of the 24 lots, about 45% of each lot is covered by a building. Now, let's keep in mind the applicant is seeking a building coverage that's close to 70%. So the average in the neighborhood is 45%. The applicant is seeking close to 70% building coverage. In my opinion, that's a significant difference. There's a significant difference between seeking 70%, but the buildings around you are at 45%. In fact, the difference is about 50% greater. They're seeking a building that has a footprint that on average per lot size is about 50% greater than the average of this neighborhood. Let's go to height. You'll see on the right-hand column, the city tax data does include the number of stories on a building. The predominant height in this area is 3 floors. The applicant is seeking 5 floors. That's a significant difference. Out of all of the buildings in the area, about 75% of them are qualified as 3 stories in height. That's the vast majority of buildings are 3 stories in height. In fact, if you'll scroll up, Bob, just one page, you'll see the graphic on the page just above this. That's just a Google image that I captured. The star is the subject properties. You'll note that generally in and around that property, you see a pretty consistent height of the structures immediately surrounding this subject property. It's a consistent height, generally around 3 stories. There are a few taller buildings here and there. The applicant has proposed an argument that this site lies in the transitional area between larger structures and more intensive structures and smaller structures. When I look at that image, I think that image tells quite the story that on all sides of this property, it's generally a pretty consistent height in and around 3 stories. So I think that's notable. Further, the neighborhood compatibility analysis conducts the massing and scale of this project to those buildings that were constructed in a historic period of development right around the turn of the century from about 1855 to 1930. In this area of the surrounding lots, of the 24 surrounding lots, 18 were constructed in this historic period of development. So there's 18 structures that are roughly in and around 100 years old and represent a different fabric, a different development pattern than what is being proposed here today. And I do think that these historic resources are worthy of protection. So, you know, basically, in my opinion, it's just a plain fact that the proposed building is significantly larger than the buildings in this neighborhood. And that's demonstrated by a pretty strong quantitative analysis of the fact-based data behind it. And I think that the applicant is proposing this size, the extra height, the extra footprint, specifically through the adjustments. So it's the adjustments that are bringing this building to be non-compatible with the surrounding area. You might be wondering how neighborhood compatibility ties to required findings. Well, first, as I noted, you know, there are a number of findings that need to be raised. The adjustments need to be tied to the structured parking, but further, the purposes of the subdivision, land development and subdivision review regulations is to promote design of land developments and subdivisions which are well integrated with the surrounding neighborhoods with regard to natural and built environments. So, in my opinion, there's impact issues when you have a building that's this much bigger, this much taller than the surrounding neighborhood. The City Plan Commission is charged with reviewing impact statements as a means to justify projects, including specifically the dimensional adjustments with projects. So of note, out of the focus areas for these impact statements, one is impacts to the built environment. And the permitting authority may require modifications to plans to mitigate negative impacts to the built environment. And in relation to this finding, the City Plan Commission is charged with reviewing impacts such as the visual impact of the size, scale, and massing of the building. And that's quote from your code. This is the guidance that your code gives you to look at the visual impact of the size, scale, and massing of the building. It's my opinion that the applicant's proposal has not met the intent of the city's code in this regard and has not met the required finding for the adjustments. And basically this is because the building is not compatible with the surrounding area through a pretty strong quantitative analysis. The next area, and I'll be pretty brief on this one, is the comprehensive plan assessment. I've got a few pages of my report dedicated to this. It calls out a number of code citations throughout the comprehensive plan. But I'll just call attention to the kind of categorical areas of focus. Many of the policies and strategies in the comprehensive plan speak to the importance of supporting sustainable development practices for reducing impermeable surface area. But this applicant is seeking modifications and adjustments to increase that. This application, or the comprehensive plan, suggests that design practices should be encouraged which do not hinder the character of the existing surrounding neighborhoods. As I've noted, I think this application is actually not compatible with the surrounding area. And with note to the policies in the plan, this area is identified in the future land use map as a neighborhood commercial mixed use designation. And in the plan's growth strategy map, this is identified as a growth corridor for mixed use. You'll note both the future land use map and the growth strategy map identify mixed use. That is a theme throughout the comprehensive plan. If you want intensity, if you want height, you want adjustments, the city would like mixed use. It's one of the several pieces of amenities that is typically given in exchange for adjustments is mixed use. This applicant is proposing a residential only use. So in my mind, this is particularly important where the applicant has an opportunity to introduce mixed use. That's the city's vision for this particular pocket for mixed use, but the applicant isn't meeting that vision. So in my opinion, the application is not consistent with the city's 2024 comprehensive plan. The last area I wanted to touch on was code compliance and how this project measures up to required findings. In my opinion, the applicant appears to require two-dimensional variances for the design of the parking spaces and providing multiple curb cuts on this property. And those variances have not been requested. And I'm aware that Mr. Azar did cover those two topics. He anticipated that I would, they're discussed in my report, and he anticipated that I would bring them up. I'd just like to read what the code requires and then just give my brief opinion on them. In zoning, in the RP district, there's a statement that lots in the RP district are limited to one curb cut. That code does not infer that existing conditions are allowed to, for someone to create two curb cuts. The applicant is improving a portion of Phones Alley in which they're creating a curb for portions of it. They're allowing a curb cut there, creating by design for their structured parking, and then they're leaving a large section of that property edge unimproved. They're not improving the curb cut. However, right behind that curb edge, they're changing the pavement. They're making it a new permeable pavement. They're readjusting and relocating parking spaces. They're adding a loading space. All these changes are being made. However, the applicant's trying to rely on it as if it's an existing condition that they can continue. However, when you make this many changes in and around that area, in my opinion, this calls for the applicant to establish a full curb edge, which is a tradition and a typical expectation of a development, that if you're going to develop the entire site with a major project, you should establish full curb edges. That does not seem to be within keeping of the code or the intent of the code. The next is the other code on the parking spaces leaving in a forward motion. The full code citation reads, each off-street vehicle space shall open directly upon an aisle or driveway of adequate width to provide access to a vehicle parking space. All off-street parking facilities shall provide access in a manner that least interferes with traffic movement for all uses except for single-family, two-family, semi-detached, and three-family. So this is a multifamily. It's not one of those uses. The parking area shall be designed so that the driver of the vehicle proceeds forward into traffic rather than backs out. The applicant is providing 3 parking spaces, and Bob, if you don't mind, it's on page, I believe we're going to be on page 9 of my report. I've just got a site plan of that just to make the visual clear for everyone here. That's the page. You could just leave it right there on that site plan. Right there on the bottom of the screen, the southern property edge, that's along Phones Alley. You're seeing those 3 parking spaces. You're seeing the loading space. That's where there's an area where they're not improving the curb edge. They're allowing these vehicles to basically enter and exit one way or the other. They're either entering or exiting in a backward motion. And these are not meeting all aspects of this curb. They're not opening onto an aisle or driveway. They're not provided in a manner that least interferes with traffic movement. So in my opinion, I do think that there are 2 missed variances here. And I do think that the particular mandate that the applicant might agree, that, as was suggested earlier, to a condition of approval that the vehicles should be mandated to back into the spaces as a way to be code compliant seems very peculiar to me. That would be very difficult to enforce. It seems as though the design on its face doesn't meet the code, and to mandate that kind of particular behavior to make sure that everyone leaves in a forward motion does not seem like that's a typical approach to conformance with the code in this case. Aside from those code compliance issues, honestly, it's my observation as collected during review of this site. The site visit was conducted to make observations. This is a busy area. There's a lot of pedestrians in this area. There's institutional uses, high school, Brown University, heavy shopping areas, housing on all sides. This is a busy area for both vehicles and pedestrians. I think these parking spaces, aside from code compliance, create practical problems for vehicles backing out, creating confusing vehicle turning movements in an area where you're right near another intersection with Brook. So I do think that there's practical problems with this design aside from code compliance. And I think this is a good opportunity. This redevelopment and this project is a good opportunity to clean that up, to not leave that to be an errant issue. I do think that these spaces create problems for pedestrians passing by. I do think that if you look at that site plan, the addition of the allowance for the building setback to be 0 feet setback at the corner of Brook and Fawns Alley, what you've done is you've extended the building all the way to the street. Those parking spaces are now in a blind spot. Cars coming down phones, cars turning off of Brook onto phones, can't see when vehicles are about to depart those parking spaces. The sightlines are now obscured by the new introduction of the building in that space. I think that creates practical problems. Basically, I think that I do envision that there's a better way to design this. If there wasn't a reliance on leaving that curb open, you could have a full sidewalk edge there. Could help build sidewalk connectivity to the other properties around it. This seems like a good opportunity just to clean that particular issue up and introduce better pedestrian safety and better boundaries between the private property and the public right of way. So in general summation, my final points here or concluding remarks are that I think the testimony I provided tonight in brief and then the report I provide evidence that the subject application has not met the required findings of approval of a minor land development. Particularly, the proposal is not consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and the proposal is not in compliance with the Providence zoning ordinance. And in my opinion, this application has not risen to the challenges of providing a reasonable, code compliant and approvable plan for a residential only building at this site. And that completes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, we gave a lot of leeway to the objector. And so for the next folks that are going to be commenting on this, we're going to use our normal 2-minute time clock. Joanne, you're going to help me with that so that I don't put it off in the middle of someone speaking again. The next individual, again, if you're joining us at home and you'd like to speak, we'd like you to line up. So press *9 or if you're calling in and raise your virtual hand if you are on your computer or tablet. In the middle bottom section of your device, your screen. The next up is Ian Saxene.
Ian Saxene, thank you so much to the CPC for your time and all the service you do for our city. I'd like to speak in support of this development. In particular, I like the fact that there was consideration for flooding in this underground parking. This is something that's been a problem in the city, and I think it deserves positive attention. I'm heartened by the fact that if Mr. Bronard gets his way, a 96-unit student housing complex will be able to be built here by right. Perhaps if we honor the character of the neighborhood, there will be a 24-hour Taco Bell on the first floor, as it is right next to Thayer Street, which I've been assured is the worst place in the entire city by opponents of new housing everywhere else. That said, my organization, the Providence Urbanist Network, often faces off against neighborhood groups who claim to speak for everybody. But on their behalf, they don't claim to speak for the whole neighborhood because they're one guy who owns a lot of property in the neighborhood. And that is a new level of chutzpah that I have heard in these meetings. I've also never heard from a NIMBY who complained about too much parking as going to cause congestion, which makes me wonder, what is the proper amount of parking to build anything in this city? Apparently the only solution is we cannot build anything at all. Now, seriously for a moment, besides speaking, I'm not able to buy an expert witness to suggest remedies of how we can learn from Coventry to be a hub of commerce and density. But I will say that we also, besides being in a housing crisis, we're in a budgetary crisis. And not all housing can be affordable. And quite frankly, if we put a large amount of, yes, high-income housing for seniors and retirees who can move out of bigger housing, and we can tax that property, we're talking about meeting a budgetary shortfall as well as housing our people. Now, the Providence Urbanist Network is also supporting affordable housing. We view this as the other side of that, to tax this property to fund much needed affordable workforce housing. workforce housing. But to go along with the abutters and these objectors, this is a new level of shamelessness. And I hope that the CPC gives it the lack of respect that it deserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Chris Tompkins. And again, if you're joining us from home or anywhere virtually, you don't have to be home. You can be at your business. You could be at the library. Please raise your virtual hand or press *9 if you're calling in.
Good evening. My name is Chris Tompkins. I'm the butter. Lived in the neighborhood for 25 years. I have no opinion or comment on the project. So why am I here tonight? I just think there needs to be some clarity as far as the memorializing the offer of Christine West, as far as the restriction on student rentals in this project. Accordingly, it appears to be going to be in the resolution of the CPC, which I want to receive confirmation that that's a recorded document. So the reason for the concern is in a capitalistic system that we have in the United States, markets change. And while the expectation of the applicant, who also happen to be substantial student housing landlords, things change. And all of a sudden, the condo market may not be in great shape in 2 years. So what is the teeth that there be a restriction on student housing in this building once it's completed? I want some assurance that there's some teeth. My only other comment of materiality is that Phones Alley looks like something out of downtown Baghdad at this point. There's been so much construction in the area that the potholes are consuming the road. This isn't just this past winter. Because of demolition and numerous construction projects, it's a complete mess. And I'm sorry, I'm taking up two minutes versus 29 minutes. I think there needs to be clarity of who's going to incur the cost of repairing Phones Alley. Is it going to be the city or is it going to be the developer? Because it is a complete and utter mess at this point. My final point is, I sure hope Christine West and her colleagues are going to use all of their professional skills to manage the traffic mess that's going to occur at this site for the next year and a half. I'm not going to be a NIMBY. I'm not opposed to it. But I think if I were a public official, there's going to be a lot of speed dials going to public officials unless there's a careful management of the traffic congestion at the corner of Brook and Angell while construction's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tompkins. Is there anyone else here in the public who would like to speak who's not on the sign-in sheet on this matter? And again, if you're joining us from the virtual world, please raise your virtual hand or press *9 if you are wishing to speak on this agenda item. And seeing that there are none remaining, we will close the public comment portion of this agenda item.
Mr. Chairman?
I'd like to start off by just one quick comment. I forgot to identify two, along with Doug McLean's report that came in before this. We had two letters, one from right here. One from Evie Famigletti and one from the College Hill Neighborhood Association that we received prior to this meeting. And then just one personal note and professional note from the City Plan Commission is that we have two planning professionals, both of which I believe I've admitted as experts when doing unified development plan review, as experts in planning field previously. So we have the utmost respect for both professionals that have spoken here this evening. Mr. Azar.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just want to make a couple of comments in response to the testimony of Mr. McLean and the statements of Mr. Garrahy. So Mr. Garrahy has said this before, and that he believes that any dimensional adjustments have to be perfectly objective. In other words, that what we should do is create some sort of table, say, that says you get exactly this much additional floor space if you provide exactly this much amenity. I disagree with that. I disagree with the interpretation of the Enabling Act when it comes to dimensional adjustments. I believe that the Enabling Act allows the commission to make adjustments and to use a certain degree of reasoned professional analysis of the surroundings. The fact that you need to make findings of much more than zoning compliance for land development projects, including findings where you have to say there shall be no significant negative environmental impacts. No significant negative environmental impacts, that's not completely objective. There's a certain amount of subjectivity that enters into this when we do this kind of work. We are clear where you're not asking for dimensional adjustments. There's really no degree of subjectivity, but when they're asking for something they're not entitled to by right, we insist that those can be granted at your discretion. And we went so far the last time around when we revised our development review regulations to put in more backup to that by including specific findings when granting dimensional adjustments, and also the requirements for statements of impact to the natural and built environment and to traffic. So I think that that we should hold fast and hold firm that you do have this discretion, and you can exercise it as long as you're following your regulations. With respect to the location of this site, I would challenge you to find a street in Providence that has changed more than Brook Street over the past 20 years. It is profound. And by design, the zoning for the commercial zoning used to extend one lot to the east of Thayer Street. We intentionally, based on a planning process, moved that to Brook Street, and that commercial line even crosses Brook Street. There's commercial zoning just to the south of this subject lot. This particular parcel, we've known it ever since the hotel was proposed. This has always been kind of an outlier and a very strange spot where zones come together. I think that and I've said this to the previous owners or the current owners, I don't know who owns this site right now, but I've said to the owners of this site that high density housing is the right thing for this site. And that's what they're providing. With respect to how much you can grant adjustments, I just want to point out that for 116 Waterman, this is a Walter Bronhard project, for the provision of 1,000 square feet of commercial space, you granted an entire floor of that building And that lot size is 6,070 square feet, and the building covers almost the whole lot. So benefit of the doubt, you allowed him perhaps 5,000 square feet of residential in exchange for 1,000 square feet of commercial space. So you have made that kind of finding. I support it. I think it was the right thing to do, to provide commercial space on that frontage along Waterman Street. The structured parking, I think it's up to you to decide. And I think your regulations give you the authority to make that decision. I do think that neighborhood compatibility is extremely important, and when it comes to lot coverage, I think certainly when it comes to height, there's absolutely justification and compatibility when it comes to height and lot coverage. I think you can very easily make the finding that given this location that it is appropriate. With respect to comments about historic fabric, this is not a historic district, first of all. However, historic scale, historic height can be a factor. I would submit that becomes much more important as you go to the east, where you actually do have some historic district and much more historic houses in buildings than you have along this Brook Street corridor. I take issue with the statement that this is overburdening the land. Again, that's a decision you can make based on your own analysis of this. That's all I have to say.
Okay. It looks like the counsel for the applicant would like to say a few things, and I'm assuming in a rebuttal.
Mr. Chairman,
Let's just mind the time and keep it brief, focus on specific
in light of
points.
Mr. Azar's comments, I don't have much to say at all. I agree with, everything that he said. The only thing I want to do is highlight a couple of things that Mr. Gary said. The fact is, this is in an RP zone, and we are entitled to rely on adjustments, and that's what we're doing. The parking requirements are a floor, not a ceiling. And based on the needs of this particular project, it requires 45 spaces. And that's a good thing, because no, we have 45. We're providing excess. The fact that another project doesn't have parking, those people are parking somewhere. Some of them bike, some of them walk, but some of them have cars. So you're gonna have to provide the parking somewhere, and this is a great way to provide parking, and you acknowledge that because you want to give adjustments to support it. I also just want to say, again, I agree with everything Mr. Azar said. I don't think you need to have several different types of amenities provided, but your zoning ordinance, we meet more than just the structured parking. Where the physical characteristics, location, or size of the site required adjustment. There was a lot of testimony relating to that. Where the location, size, and type of use require an adjustment. There was a lot of testimony about that. Where the design standards require an adjustment. We talked about the parking requirements, the size, the aisle widths, those types of things. Where other amenities not required are provided. We're providing EV stations. There's plenty of amenities that we're providing that we didn't list because the structured parking makes sense to add height and to, make the footprint larger. Thank you, Mr. Azar, for mentioning 116 Waterman Street. That's the very building that Mr. Bronhard owns, and he's at 63% building coverage. And you know, with regard to these variances, we're not required to ask for variances. The zoning official has made determinations that we comply with zoning, and that's what we have to do. So we're not required to ask for variances. We're required to comply with zoning. Your zoning official said we comply, and that's what we're gonna rely on. Finally, one last thing, with all due respect to Mr. McLean, who I work with often, he is not a traffic expert, so all of the comments about, you know, pedestrian movements and blind spots, those are meant for site engineers that can talk about traffic, movements. Thank you.
I'll make it brief as well.
Thank you.
So I don't understand sampling properties that fit your needs, okay? We're not asking for a variance. If we were asking for a variance, maybe there'd be some justification why you only sampled properties within a 200-foot radius. I sampled properties represented the complete blocks surrounding this. And the reason why I did this is because there has been a change in the environment of this community. As Shakespeare, not Shakespeare, my apologies. As Mark Twain once said, there's lies, big lies, and then there's statistics. So you can't just take an average. I did a sampling far greater than Mr. McLean's. I looked at 44 separate properties, and I said, I looked at all the surrounding blocks. And yes, it averages out to 45%, but that's also taken into consideration older construction and the way it was built. So let's look at what the character's been in the last several years. I'm looking at a property built in 2000 that has 81% building coverage. 2023, 80% building coverage. 2014, 86 building coverage. 2018, I could go on and on. The point is, this community is trying to maximize usage of its land resources because you have limited land resources, especially in the urban corridor and in the transit corridor. Of course you're going to. That's where you want the development and the growth. That's why you want to maximize usage of your mass transit. You want to bring more people into these selected areas. So to say we should limit development is just perplexing to me, those kind of comments and those kind of arguments. That is bizarre. And as for the idea that we should be minimizing parking when we can incorporate into a development, we could provide surface parking by right. We could shrink down this building. It would be contrary to every goal and objective in your comprehensive plan. It would be by right. We could get administratively approved. Does that make sense to this commission? Let's go on. Let's use some common sense in approving this project.
Thanks. So I won't do a comprehensive rebuttal because I feel like we addressed many of these points in our presentation. I'll just point out for context, Phones Alley, the prior development condition had at least 22 cars. We counted more on satellite view that were tandem parked and backed into Phones Alley. So we're reducing that to the 4 spaces. So we're making a drastic improvement over what that condition had been for decades. You know, the adjacent neighbors on Phones Alley all back into the street, Vedanta, who we represent, so just to note for the record, and then as Phones Alley continues across the street. So this is very much a service alley, as Bob has pointed out, and in a very accepted existing condition for which we have met and gotten the consent of the traffic engineer. I want to point out, and thank you for Mr. Tompkins for pointing out, we will absolutely abide by the condition against no student rental. It's not in our interest to have that. Again, we will be needing to repair, rebuild Phones Alley, as well as any other sidewalks and public right-of-way that might be damaged. Phones Alley is in miserable shape right now, and it absolutely needs to be repaired. We will need to do that as part of this project. I didn't mention it as one of the abutter concerns, but Wheeler School is also interested in construction traffic, making sure that that's managed and minimized. The intent right now is to send all vehicles south on Brook Street where it can, you know, link up with the access points to the south, because we know that Brook and Angell is very difficult. And we do intend to meet at the end of the spring and before construction begins with any abutter that wants. We'll have a meeting with Wheeler School. We'll have meetings with the residential neighborhoods that Councilman Gonzalez has already offered to arrange. We will have ongoing communication on that. Finally, as you consider upcoming zoning changes, as we talked about, I know that you're doing an abbreviated stage 3 of tonight's meeting, and think about other incentives. We can't list them because they're not official yet, but 2 important considerations is our intent to have this be an all-electric building with the asterisk for cooking. And we also are treating 100% of stormwater. Now, those are both very big issues, you know, for climate change, for ecological responsibility generally. Technically, from a legal perspective, they're not incentives yet, but that is the intent, to provide those additional incentives in addition to what has been expressed multiple times by neighbors in terms of the dislike of surface parking. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, boy. So there was, did you want to mention one more thing?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think, you know, this issue of backing out, I honestly don't think it's an issue, but if you want to make it a condition that those 3 spaces, we don't count the loading space as such. I mean, that's generally going to be where loading spaces are not the same as parking, so that rule doesn't apply to loading. But if you want to make a condition that those 3 parking spaces are
I think if we're talking about keeping it consistent with the neighborhood, there are a dozen examples that I can see on Google Maps, including I think the objector owns a few of those to the west on Foams Alley that also have the same condition that occurs where you pull in and out of the rear directly onto Foams Alley. So I think if we're talking about consistency with the neighborhood, I think that's fine with me. As far as I'm concerned, I can't speak for the other commissioners, but
just, you know, out of an abundance of caution, if you want to make it a condition that those vehicles have to back into the spaces, that way they're complying with the letter of the zoning ordinance.
But how do you force that? I mean, you're gonna put signs up, does that satisfy that requirement? Because, you know, you got Uber or whatever other delivery trucks, cars coming in there. You can't enforce, or no one can enforce, they're gonna back into it.
There are certain zoning requirements that are enforceable because the building is built in a particular way, but there are many zoning requirements that relate to the behavior of tenants. We have rules that say you can't park on the grass. You can't jump a curb cut to get into your yard. You can't, you know, those are behavioral. Admittedly, they're challenging. But if we get complaints and if there's a demonstrated pattern, we can enforce. And for an apartment, you know, especially for a condominium building, I think it would be relatively easy to enforce. You know who the owners are. They live there. So it would not be the hardest of the sort of behavioral regulations to enforce.
I mean, I think we've heard a lot tonight, and just big picture, I want to say how impressed I am that the lack of community input into this meeting when every other agenda item we've had anywhere in these, you know, 20, 30 block radiuses has been significantly more well attended. So it shows that the applicant not only said that they did the outreach, they engaged the community in a very, very meaningful way. Otherwise, we would have a lot more people objecting to this right now. The College Hill Neighborhood Association said they support this. They still have concerns about the design and construction and things like that, which I'm hopeful the applicant will continue to engage with the community as this process continues. The applicant also testified to what can be built here, which we know because we've heard it many, many times from the neighborhood at large, isn't desirable from the abutters to these areas. This is a residential use, a high quality residential use, and it won't be student rentals, which is obviously one of the biggest concerns. There will be ownership units where people will have a stake in the the well-being of the building and the surrounding community. It's funny about parking. No matter what anyone puts on a map, on a plan for parking, someone's gonna be upset with it, whether there's too much or too little. I think one of the things we've been consistent about saying is that we, as the commission, want to reduce the parking maximums and let the market drive what is needed for each project individually. And I think this is a great example of that. They believe that they're going to need more parking than we will require, and that they're going to build it to meet that market demand. That makes sense to me. Then the applicant testified to the reasons that the relief was required. The dimensional adjustments that they're requesting specifically to the parking, structured parking that they're providing, and the unique characteristics of the site, along with the fact that technically they have 3 streets of frontage, not a side yard, rear yard, and they have a rear yard. That's really it, but it's actually a side yard, which is kind of funny. But actually, that is the rear yard, but it works. And it's a very unique characteristic. We have lot coverage, which they're requesting dimensional waivers on, but they're also providing stormwater treatment and storage, which is one of the main reasons we have a regulation on impervious coverage, is because that's not required, but to combat that, they are providing stormwater treatment and storage. So they're providing excess canopy coverage, landscaping requirements, environmental impact, efficiency, and climate goals. And we have a robust report from a planning professional showing that the impact statements that we have requested have been met. They've looked at all of the impacts to the surrounding communities and have figured out ways to make them compatible with the surrounding area. So I think this is a good project. We've seen a lot of aspects for this, a lot of thoughts, a lot of possibilities. It is a vacant parcel, a very large vacant parcel, and it looks like something that will be compatible with the neighborhood. I mean, I'm supporting this project, and I would love to hear what others think, and we want to start talking about some waivers or discussions or adjustments.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact of the level of engagement here is a huge factor, and this has been clearly been discussed with the community at length. We're not hearing huge objection, and this seems like an exemplary process in terms of hearing what the community has to say and tailoring the project to that. I also think I agree, and I just want to re-emphasize the building coverage is not as much of an issue because of the stormwater management plan. And if every project could do that, then we wouldn't be worried about building coverage.
And we've been having discussions about incentives, and this is definitely one of the discussion points. We've been talking about design incentives for stormwater retention treatment to prevent street flooding and these events that have been catastrophic to certain areas of the city as far as vehicular traffic. It's a problem, and it's only going to continue to get worse, and they're addressing it without having to. We don't have that mechanism to reward them for it yet, but I think it's worth noting, and they're requesting an adjustment for the impervious or lot coverage, excuse me, but they're already taking matters into their own hands to deal with it.
And then I also I think that the planting plan is thoughtful, although, you know, obviously it had some development that is probably going to happen over the next phases of design, but there's clearly been a ton of thought about the ground plane and how the parking deals with the sloping ground plane. I think it from a design standpoint, it makes total sense, the kind of treatment of entry and ground plane and parking and vegetative buffer. And so I actually think that part of the project is super, super strong. And should also be kind of, you know, at least acknowledged as we're thinking about dimensional adjustments. Because it has everything to do with the setback, right? The lesser the setback, the more we sort of rely on those things to make the edges feel good.
Right.
I have two quick things. One is that, you know, in the project that we looked at in the beginning of this hearing 3 weeks ago when it started, was Rhode Island Hospital, and we looked at the aerial view and it was just in surface lot after surface lot, and we were like, oh my gosh, all this wasted land, and it's just these surface parking lots. This project, and you're just like, why can't we build structured parking? This project comes along and builds the parking into the project. So it's really, so it's very low impact, quite frankly, to get, and smart to get the, like you said, market demand of cars in a way that doesn't create surface parking lots and doesn't waste land on parking lots. So I commend that. The other thing is, I won't say grew up, but definitely spent years 0 to 6 at 456 Brook Street. That was my childhood home. I remember when you two played in that little field next to the Brown Field House, like in 1980. I rode my tricycle around Thayer Market, which is now CVS and Flatbread Pizza. I mean, if you want to talk about the character of the neighborhood, that ship sailed a long time ago. I mean, my childhood home, my dad had a garden back there. That's been a parking lot for decades. I mean, Wheeler School, my sister went to it when it was just that little carriage house. I mean, so I get it. Sure, at one point it was a neighborhood with a lot of character, but that's been gone for so long. And to say that this doesn't fit into like the traditional neighborhood, I mean, I just don't see it. I think that it actually fits really well. I love how it fits with the Citizens Bank building, which actually used to be my pediatrician in 1975. You know, I think the scale really fits into the neighborhood. I think that the materials are very thoughtful in terms of the colors and how they fit in. So I wholeheartedly agree with Bob's assessment of how it meets the criteria and also how it fits into the scale of the area. So I think I'm very excited about it.
I also think it was thoughtful that not only they're providing structured parking, but that it's entering and exiting off Foams Alley as opposed to Brook, or any of the main thoroughfares. Like it's thoughtful, and we do need housing of all levels. We've talked about that many times. It's not just affordable housing. We need high quality housing. We need middle income housing. We need all housing types. So this is definitely a need.
Looks like a good project to me. I don't have any objections to it. You got anything?
I think, a lot of the comments that were made are some that I agree with, and I think it's a good project. And since I'm the last one, I guess we can move on to, actually making a motion.
Yeah, the first motion would be the waiver for the submission of photometric plan at the preliminary plan stage with the condition that it be submitted at the final plan.
So moved.
And we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second. Mr. Chair, just with all of your votes, just make sure that you're incorporating the findings in the staff report, and if you want to also reference the applicant's presentation as well.
Didn't we just do that leading up to this? But we'll do.
I think you did, but just, it's always
So-
good as part of your motions.
Based on the testimony, the findings that we've made today in the staff report, that the applicant's materials, and our discussion we just undertook, we could make a waiver to grant the waiver from submission of photometric plan to preliminary plan stage with the condition that it be submitted with the final plan.
I made my motion, so moved.
Thank you. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? Noel seconds the amended motion. All right, we'll go around and vote. Noel? Aye. Dave? Aye. Sid?
Aye.
Charlotte?
Aye.
Neil?
Aye.
And I vote aye. All right, so the next vote that we need to take is on the dimensional adjustments, and if we were to make a motion, it would be to grant the dimensional adjustments, finding that the applicant meets the criteria for the dimensional adjustments in 1904E of the ordinance, and having made positive findings in conformance with section 101005.b of the DRR. And we have done both, and we will incorporate the testimony the impact statements, all of the material submitted by the applicant, the discussion, testimony, and our discussion thereof.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a fully formed motion. Noel. Aye. Dave.
Aye.
Sid.
Aye.
Charlotte. Miguel.
Aye.
And I vote aye. The final vote would be to approve the preliminary plan based on the foregoing discussion, the submitted materials by the applicant, the testimony, our discussion and the staff report collectively going into inform our decisions. That we vote to grant the preliminary plan approval subject to the following conditions: that the drainage plan shall be subject to the city engineer's approval. The planting of the street trees shall be subject to the city forester's approval. The applicant shall be responsible for the maintenance of all proposed street trees. And number 3, in accordance with the applicant's offer, rental of dwelling units to undergraduate students shall be prohibited. Undergraduate college students may live in owner-occupied units. Rental to graduate students shall only be allowed upon a majority vote of the condominium board. And then subsection 3 of this would be fines of $500 per incident for disruptive behavior or excessive noise in alignment with city noise ordinance shall be imposed and waivable only by a majority vote of the condominium board. Then I'm gonna put a number 4 in here, which is vehicles utilizing the parking along Foams Alley must back into the spaces so that they can exit with their vehicle facing forward. That's acceptable. Number 5, any required encroachment permit shall be submitted at the permitting stage. And number 6, the final plan approval shall be delegated to the DPD staff.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we'll go around and do a voice vote. Noel.
Aye.
Dave.
Aye.
Sid. Charlotte. Miguel.
Aye.
And I vote aye.
Thank you.
Congratulations and best of luck. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second? All right. Adjourned.